Disclaimer. The following content may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. As Takashi Ogura enters the school, Ohan says, "Hey, isn't that's the kid?" Ken says, "Yikes, scary." Ohan says, "No way, you're kidding." Ken says, "Of course not, you fool." As Takashi enters the class, everyone begins to look at him as he takes his seat. Just then, Himi comes over and says, "Can we talk a bit? You know, about the plan to go to the cinema with everyone in the class?" "It's cancelled," Takashi says, looking down. "Oh, sorry about that." Ken says, "Hey, look at those eyes. You made him angry." Himi says, "Who cares? Do you really want him to tag along?" Takashi says in his mind, "Of course. If I were in their position, I'd definitely do the same. I have to get used to it. It's going to be like this for the rest of my life anyway. For the rest of my life." As Takashi was about to leave school, Sasaki calls out, "Takashi-kun?" Takashi gets shocked on seeing her as he says, "Sasaki-san." Sasaki says, "It's been 3 years. Takashi-kun, how is it going?" Takashi goes into a flashback 3 years ago. In the class, the teacher said, "Is there any question? If not, then that's it for today." As the bell rings, Ken runs out, calling, "Hurry up, Takashi!" Takashi calls out, "Wait for me, Ken-chan." Takashi says, "It's about time for the regular selection, huh?" Ken says, "The third years have just retired after all." Takashi says in his mind, "Maybe even I have a chance to join the main team." Ken says, "But I'd be fine if you are chosen as well." As Takashi gets shocked, he says, seeing Sasaki's drawing, "Huh? No way. That's impossible." "Wow, you're so skilled, Sasaki-san." Sasaki smiles, saying, "I'm not that good." Aoi says, as expected from an art club member. Yanai says, "You've been good at drawing since grade school, Try drawing a different character this time." Ken says, "Oh, what are you staring at, It's obvious that you have a thing for her." Takashi fumbles, saying, "No, I don't." Just then, Sasaki calls out, "Ah, Takashi-kun, here, take it. I went to the pool with my family yesterday. You gave me a souvenir back then, so it's a payback. I hope you're okay with dolphins." Takashi says, "I love dolphins." Just then the homeroom teacher Yamashita calls out, "Oi, Ogura, you were late by an hour today if I'm not mistaken." Takashi says, "Oh, sorry? I had a morning practice, but I wasn't late or anything." Yamashita says, "Don't make excuses. You do know that school is a place to study, don't you? You've been slacking off recently." Also, just then, Sasaki says, "Ah, sensei, I have something to talk about club activity." As Yamashita leaves with her, Ken says, "That Sasaki is really something else. She even managed to get along with our homeroom Yamashita." Takashi says, "Well, he is the art club advisor." Ken says, "Well, that too. She's pretty popular, you know." As Takashi says, "Huh?" Ken says, "She's got good looks and good personality after all. As far as I know, there are 4 guys eyeing her." Takashi asks in a loud tone, "Who?" Then calms down. Ken says, "But you sure get along with her, huh? Because you were in the same class during 5th and 6th grade?" Just then, Coach Hashi calls out, "Gather up. I will now announce the names of those who will be joining the main team." As Ken and Takashi were going back home, Ken says, "Grats, Takashi. Do your best on my behalf, okay?" Takashi says, "Ken-chan, I still don't get why I was chosen. In terms of defending, you are so much better than me. I just got lucky." As Ken says, "It's your ability." Takashi says, "Your batting skill is exceptional, and you always stayed behind to practice as well." Ken says, "I won't give up. I'll definitely be a regular for the next tournament." As Takashi looks surprised, Ken says, "Takashi, you're my best pal, so next time, we both are going to make it together." As Takashi says in his mind, "Best pal." Then he says to Ken, "Ken-chan." Ken says, "Say something. It's embarrassing, you know. Geez, let's get going." As Takashi calls out, "Ah, wait for me." As Takashi comes home, his mother, Mrs. Ogura, says, "What? You made it to the team. Wow, that's amazing." Meanwhile, a regular customer, Matsu-san, says, "You did it, Takashi-chan. Your team has a lot of members, right?" Takashi says, "There are 20 people from my year." As Matsu says, "Let's celebrate. Want a drink, kiddo?" Mrs. Ogura scolded, saying, "Matsu-san, my son is still 13. As Takashi smiles, Mrs. Ogura says, "Takashi, your dad in heaven must be overjoyed right now." Matsu says, "Takashi-kun, is that the bat that your father gave you?" As Takashi removes the bat out, he says, "Yes, our club allows us to use our personal bats." As Takashi swings, Matsu says, "Looking great, Takashi." Just then, Ni comes down, saying, "Hey, why are you swinging a bat inside the store?" As Takashi says, "Ni-chan." Ni says, "Geez, mind your manners when there's a customer." Mrs. Ogura says, "You say that a lot, even though you're bringing your boyfriend upstairs now." As Matsu says, "Oh, boyfriend, huh?" Ni says, "Hey, geez, does this house even have any kind of privacy?" As Ni goes upstairs, Matsu says in his mind, "Well, she's a university student." As Takashi calls out, saying, "Ni-chan, I made it to the team." As Ni goes inside her room, she calls out, "Takashi." He smiles, turning around as she says, "Absolutely don't peep in my room." Takashi says, "I won't." Ni calls out again, "Takashi." Takashi. As Takashi says annoyed, what now? Ni says, grats bro, not bad. As Takashi says, Ni-chan, thanks. Ni says to her boyfriend Yamazaki, sorry to keep you waiting, Yamazaki-kun. The next day at school, as Takashi was cleaning the board, Sasaki comes, saying, sorry, Takashi-kun, I made you do class duty by yourself. Takashi says, Sasaki-san, it's fine. I only need to clean this blackboard. As Sasaki says, but, Takashi says, were you busy? Sasaki says, yes, Shimizu-kun from class 2 called me out. As Takashi repeats in his mind, called me out. He says in his mind, Shimizu-kun is that popular Eichmann, isn't he? Then he says to Sasaki, and Sasaki says, he asked me to go out with him. As Takashi again says, and Sasaki says, of course I rejected him. We're still in our first year. There's no way I can be in that kind of relationship. As Takashi calms down, Sasaki says, were you worried? Takashi recalls Ken saying, there are 4 guys eyeing on her. Sasaki says, Takashi-kun, you're so tall. And here, I haven't grown any taller since grade school. The class duty is done. Takashi calls out, Sasaki-san, if you're free, can we meet this Saturday? I have a coupon for McDonald's. Seeing Sasaki is quiet, Takashi says, well, if you don't wanna, Ken comes running, saying, oi, Takashi, the club is starting. As Takashi says in his mind, nice timing, fool. He says to Sasaki, see you tomorrow, bye. As Takashi was leaving, Sasaki calls out, Takashi-kun, let's go eating out together on Saturday. As a celebration for making it to the team, Takashi gets happy as he says in his mind, she knew. Then he says, of course. Good luck on your club too, Sasaki-san. Sasaki says, we're on break today though. As Yamashita says, goodbye, to students Edano and Hori. Edano says, did he just say goodbye to us? Hori says, wow, he's so damn creepy. Meanwhile, Sasaki sees Yamashita and says, sensei, goodbye. Yamashita says, Sasaki, can I have a minute? As Yamashita takes Sasaki to the art prep room, Sasaki says, do you have something to talk about? As Yamashita locks the door, Sasaki says, if it's about the submission task. Yamashita says, Sasaki, you're really kind, aren't you? Even though everyone treats me badly. As he hugs her, you're the only one on my side. As Sasaki pushes him away, saying, number please no, why are you doing this? Yamashita says, I understand, Sasaki. You have a feeling for me, right? That's why you're so kind to me. Isn't that right, Sasaki? Sasaki says, shocked, no, you're getting it wrong. There's no way I… Yamashita says, wrong. As he hugs her, he says, then were you just toying around with me? As Yamashita hurts her, he says, you're getting along with Ogura Takashi lately. It's all his fault that you won't love me. Meanwhile, as Takashi catches the ball, Ken says, nice catch. You're really fired up today. Well, of course, it's all thanks to the date promise with Sasaki. Takashi says, it wasn't for a date. Ken says, and you're already a regular too. You're living the best of your life right now. But I won't lose. Senpai, let's do this. Takashi says, do your best, Ken-chan. Recalling the time in the present day, Takashi says in his mind, the best of my life, huh? That might be true, but that's kind of scary. In the flashback, as Sasaki lay on the floor, Yamashita took her clips, saying, now this has become our secret. If you tell anyone about this, the entire world would see all these photos and videos. Please don't make me do it. Recalling the time in the present day, Takashi says, that date was the beginning of my long hellish life. The next day at school, Takashi calls out, Professor, Sasaki didn't come to the first period. Did she take a rest? Yamashita says, yeah, it seems like she got a cold. Later on in the day, as Sasaki was laying in her room, Sasaki's mother opens the door, saying, how do you feel? Sasaki says, Mom, I think I feel a little better. Sasaki's mother says, I see, I'm glad. As Sasaki says, Mom, you know, her mother says, oh, I'm sorry for making you wait. Actually, your professor came here to give you your copies. He said that he wanted to see your bedroom, and as he came all the way to visit you, I couldn't help but invite him to come in. As Yamashita enters, Sasaki's mother says, I'll bring some tea. As Sasaki's mother leaves, Yamashita says, thank you, Mrs. Then he says to Sasaki, Sasaki, you must not skip school. If you act in a suspicious way, Sasaki gets scared and calls out, Mum, but her voice was too low as Yamashita says, showing her the video. Sasaki, come to school properly without skipping it. If you skip your classes again tomorrow, I'll come every single day to visit you in your bedroom. As Yamashita was about to leave, Sasaki's mother says, oh, Professor. Yamashita says, excuse me, something came up at work. Although you're too busy, I'm so sorry. Sasaki's mother says, visit us whenever you like. He's a good professor, Yui, used as a nickname for gentle by loved ones in Japan. The next day at school, as Ken says, I'm exhausted. The dash is hard in the morning. Takashi says, really? Who thought of the morning training? Ken says, I've got the confidence to think I'll get it for winter. As Takashi sees Sasaki, he says, Sasaki. Then he says in his mind, her cold is gone. Seeing Sasaki is lost, Takashi calls again. Sasaki? Seeing him, Sasaki says, Takashi, good morning. Seeing she looks exhausted, Takashi says, good morning. Then says in his mind, is she still feeling sick? Sasaki says, Takashi, I'm sorry. About tomorrow's eating out, it seems I won't be able to go. Takashi says in his mind, it seems the cold has stretched on for a bit. So he says to Sasaki, it's totally fine. The most important thing is that you recover your health. As Takashi puts his head on the table, he says in his mind, but what happened? Do you want a hamburger coupon? Recalling the time in the present day, Takashi says, a mere cold. That's what I thought that day. But in class, Adano says, Sasaki, did you hear anything of what I said? Hore says, recently you've been very blank, haven't you? Sasaki says, sorry. Meanwhile, as Takashi sees Sasaki, he says in his mind, that expression again, even though it has already been 2 weeks since she was absent. As Ken says, Takashi, let's go to the club. Just then, Hore says, wait, look, it's Yamashita. That guy, he doesn't talk to boys, right? Adano says, yeah, just to girls. Really, he's a pedophile. It could be that he imagines dirty things while seeing girls. As Sasaki says in her mind, what, disgusting? Hore says, would you kiss him for 1 million yen? Adano says, no, I'd die first. After all, suddenly Sasaki vomits, making Adano ask worriedly, whoa, are you okay? As Adano says, what's going on, Sasaki? As Takashi comes asking, what's going on, Sasaki? Yamashita also comes, saying, hey, what's going on, Sasaki? As Sasaki says, I am sorry. I'll clean it right away. Yamashita says, I will do it so. Somebody take Sasaki to the infirmary. As Adano says to Sasaki, are you okay? On the way back home, Takashi calls out, Sasaki, have you already finished the club's activities? Sasaki says, yeah or so. Then she says in her mind, although actually, I left in the middle. Then Takashi says, hey Sasaki, is there something that's bothering you? If you don't mind, you can talk about it with me. Just then, Takashi pulls Sasaki saying, Sasaki, a bike, as she was lost in her thoughts and didn't see the bike coming. But Sasaki gets annoyed, saying, no, get off me, don't touch me. Takashi got startled as he says, I'm sorry. As he runs off, Sasaki says, sorry, it's not what you think. Takashi, help me. Meanwhile, back with Takashi, he was saying in his mind, she completely hates me. What did I do for Sasaki to hate me? The next day at school, Ken says, practice balancing at lunchtime? Takashi says, yeah, I told the seniors during the morning training. You know, yesterday I left in the middle of the practice. Ken says, well, that is expected of you. Now that you mention it, did you talk with Sasaki yesterday? Seeing Takashi's sad face, Ken says, geez, don't worry. Give up on her. Continue with the next. Takashi walks away saying, yeah, thank you. Suddenly, Takashi sees Sasaki and says in his mind, Sasaki, she has a gloomy face again. Where is she going? I mean, I can't help but worry about her. I don't think it's necessary. As Takashi was following her, he loses her, saying, that's strange, I'm sure that she was going this way. Suddenly, Takashi hears a voice, saying, Sasaki, your skin is really smooth. It feels so good. As Takashi tries to open the door but is unable to, he says, oh no, it's blocked. So he opens the small window and is shocked as he sees Yamashita on Sasaki. He sees Yamashita saying, don't speak aloud. Since this is the 4th time, I thought you got it. But this is the 1st time at lunchtime. We've no time, so let's end this sooner than usual. Suddenly, Sasaki sees Takashi, who was recalling Sasaki's smiling face as he said angrily in his mind, you, Sasaki's smiling face, you've... Sasaki calls out feebly, help me. Yamashita says, just now, did you ask for help? That makes me sad. Even though I love you so much, Sasaki, you're different from the other girls, aren't you? Kind of like an angel. Suddenly, Takashi hits with his bat on Yamashita's head and says, Sasaki, hurry up, get out of here. As Sasaki runs out, Yamashita grabs hold of Takashi, saying, what do you think you're doing to a teacher? As Takashi hits his back, saying, what do you think you are doing? Meanwhile, in class, Ken says, Professor, once again it's Takashi and Sasaki. Professor Mori says, they'll be in trouble for being late, although they're in the midway. Good grief. As Ken was in class, he says, but this teacher is super strict. If I'm not careful and fall asleep, I'll be. Suddenly, he sees Takashi from the window and says, oi, class has already begun. What are you doing? And to make things worse, it's math class. As Takashi stands in the doorway, he was holding a bloody bat and his clothes were covered in blood. The students get shocked as the girls scream. Professor Mori says, looking at Takashi, is that blood? It is freaking blood. As Ken says, shocked and confused, Takashi. Professor Mori says, hey, what the heck happened? Takashi says, killed. I hit homeroom teacher Mr. Yamashita with a bat and killed him. As the class is sealed, the principal Naru says, listen up, everyone go back to their classroom, now. Edano says, was Mr. Yamashita the one that got killed? As Nubira says, it's like a sea of blood. Out in the ground, two boys were speaking as one boy, Sakai, says, "Are you for real? Did Ogura from Class 3 really do it?" As Ken sees Sasaki being taken away, he runs over saying, "Sasaki? Ah, wait a sec. Was it really Takashi?" As if that guy could kill a person. Edeno says, "Sasaki-san probably saw everything, right?" Hiro says, "She's completely spaced out, hasn't she?" Over at the principal's office, Principal Naru says, "Are the police here yet?" Teacher Sawaya says, "They should be here soon." Teacher Tamai says, "So, us, what's going on with Ogura Takashi?" Meanwhile, on being questioned, Takashi says, "I disliked the homeroom teacher from the get-go, so I killed him." Meanwhile, the police calls Mrs. Ogura's shop and tells her. The gatekeeper says, "The culprit is a 13-year-old boy?" A reporter says, "Where is this person?" As the cameraman says, "Looks like he's already been handed to the police." Another reporter says, "This is going to be one hell of a story." A random student says, "It kind of feels like this is not real. I might be a little excited now." As Ken comes grabbing his collar and says, "What the heck are you saying? Takashi is in a bad situation right now, you know?" The boy says, "Huh? Are you trying to protect the murderer?" As another boy says, "What are you guys doing?" Meanwhile, a reporter asks a random student who says, "Although it was 2 weeks ago, Takashi was late to class because of his morning practice. Afterwards, he was reprimanded by the teacher." Edeno says, "Yeah, I also heard about that." As Hiro says, "Killing a person just for this reason." The reporter says, "So basically the relationship with his teacher was terrible." Ken says, "Hold on a minute. Merely because of that, Takashi wouldn't." Another reporter comes over to Ken, saying, "Hey, you there. Are you good friends with Ogura Takashi? Do you know his address and stuff like that? If you can provide photos, that would be even better." Over with Takashi's sister, Kanako-ni wakes up saying, "Oh my god, I fell asleep. Ah, Yamazaki-kun, you're awake." Yamazaki says, "Kanako, isn't this where your younger brother goes to high school?" Just then, Kanako-ni sees 7 missed calls from her mother. Meanwhile, on the news, the lady anchor says, "The next piece of news." As the male anchor says, "It happened in Yokohama. The murder of a teacher by Shunin A." But most shockingly, the culprit is only 13 years old. Meinen University professor Taro Hashimoto says, "In principle, those under 14 years of age are not criminally liable. However, this time around, it's a murder incident. The children's court might decide to hand over this case to the family court. That is to say, it will be treated as a common juvenile case." The male anchor says, "Is there even a possibility a 13-year-old will be sent to youth reform school?" Novelist Maruta Natsuki says, "I can't say it's not possible. Even the motive of the crime was shocking. It was merely something like, 'hate my teacher,' wasn't it?" The female anchor says, "To take someone's life over such a reason. Moreover, the murder weapon, this bat. Isn't it said to be a memento of their father? I feel as though there is still more to the story." Meanwhile, a person says watching the news, "More to the story, huh?" and goes through the online comments. He also posts a photo of Takashi and his parents' store. Meanwhile, as Mrs. Ogura visits Takashi, she says, "Takashi, things are okay on our side. I am sure that even the store can reopen soon. For now, think only about your own situation." Takashi says, "Sorry, I screwed everything up. I really am sorry." As Mrs. Ogura comes back, she sees the shop has been labeled and trashed. Seeing the paint, Mrs. Ogura says, "Oh dear, did the graffiti increase?" A neighbor says, "What were they thinking, resuming business again in the first place?" Another one says, "The media loitering around must be a real nuisance." Mrs. Ogura bows to them, saying, "For causing you so much trouble, I am deeply sorry." Just then, Kanako comes back. As Mrs. Ogura says, "Kanako, so this morning, the media even came to the university." Kanako says, "I got asked all these silly questions. It totally sucks. It goes without saying, my boyfriend and friends have even begun keeping their distance." As Mrs. Ogura says, Kanako snaps, saying, "Why do I even have to suffer like this? Even though Takashi is to blame for everything. Now, even the shop is done for." After a few days in the court, the judge says, "Well then, I will announce the punishment. The boy will be sent to a children's self-reliance support facility for a 2-year period, starting from the 15th of November 2014. This shall be treated as a compulsory measure. Any questions?" Takashi says, "There are none." After the verdict, Mrs. Yamashita says, "A facility? Why is it not youth reform school? A person has been killed, you know. What's more, he just needs to meekly pass time inside until he is a high school student. Then he can get out, right? This kind of punishment is sorely lacking." A reporter says, "The murdered teacher's wife?" Another one says, "She's quite upset, isn't she?" The first one says, "Well, it's understandable. The husband suddenly had his life snatched away through no fault of his own. And now, the culprit is being protected by juvenile law." As Mrs. Yamashita says, "Looks like this civil trial is going to become a complicated situation." Meanwhile, Mrs. Ogura goes to visit Sasaki's home. Seeing Mrs. Ogura, Sasaki's mother says rudely, "What do you want?" Mrs. Ogura says, well, I want to talk to Sasaki-chan for a bit." Sasaki's mother gets angry, saying, "What the hell are you thinking? Have you got any idea what Yui experienced because of your son? Panic attacks happen even when doing things like eating. Even now, she is unable to sleep alone at night." Mrs. Ogura says, "I am truly sorry." However, as Sasaki comes down, seeing her, Mrs. Ogura says, "Hey, Yui-chan, there was another reason for what happened, right? As if that child could kill a person." Sasaki's mother slaps Mrs. Ogura, shocking Sasaki, saying, "Go back. Why are you still staying in this town in the first place? What are you even thinking? Don't appear before us again," and slams the door. As Takashi comes out of his flashback, he says in his mind, "Time has passed by in the blink of an eye. I graduated from middle school within the institution." Mukui says, seeing Ohan's phone, "Ah, so it's this film, huh? Yeah, I saw that film all over the billboards everywhere." Ohan says, "I've heard the special effects are impressive." Suddenly he sees Takashi, now known as Yamasaki. So he calls out, "Hey, Yamasaki, are you coming too?" Yamasaki Takashi looks towards Ohan and says in his mind, "Those events happened almost 3 years ago. I left behind my life in Yokohama, and I have begun a new school life in the Chiba prefecture." As Ohan comes over, he says to Yamasaki Takashi, "To be honest, my impression of you has changed greatly." As Mukui says, "You mean Yamasaki?" Ohan says, "Honestly, when I first saw you, I thought this guy was going to be hard to understand, but it turns out you're just a decent guy." Takashi says in his mind, "As it hasn't been long since the incident, we changed my name to my mother's maiden name. It gives me a new hometown. It also gives me a new background. Everything is made up. Lies used to whitewash my past to survive the present." Back in class, Ohan says, "That's right, so about this trip to the cinema." Hearing them, Yamada says, "A film? And did you just say that Yamasaki is also coming?" As Yamasaki Takashi says, "Probably." Yamada says, "I have to come now." As she bends over Yamasaki Takashi's desk, she says, "By the way, Yamasaki here has been ignoring all the texts I send him." Yamasaki Takashi says, "I'm very sorry." Just then, Mukui leans over, whispering to Yamasaki Takashi and says, "Yamasaki, she's totally into you. Not only that, but she's cute enough to spend time with, no?" Yamasaki Takashi says in his mind, "No one knows that I am involved with that incident a few years ago." As Yamasaki Takashi comes home, he says, "I'm home." Mrs. Ogura says, "Welcome back. Are you busy tonight?" Yamasaki Takashi says, "As busy as I ever am. Can I help you with anything?" Mrs. Ogura says, "No, there's no problem, thank you. Compared to you, anyway." Takashi gets shocked as his mother says, "Your sister has come home. You two haven't said a word in years to each other, have you?" As they were eating, Mrs. Ogura asks Kanako, "So, picked up any strange habits? Living alone?" Kanako doesn't reply, so she says, "So, it's already been a whole year, huh?" Then Mrs. Ogura asks Takashi, "And Takashi, how are you? Going to go play with any friends recently?" Takashi says, "Ah, yeah. I'm gonna go watch a film with some classmates next week." Mrs. Ogura says, smiling, "Really? That's great." Kanako says, "Oh, Takashi, you normally spend your holidays stuffed inside doing nothing. Your mum was starting to worry about you." She gets up in anger, saying, "I have to apologize, but I'm leaving now." Takashi calls out, "Sis?" As their mom calls out, "Wait, Kanako." Takashi runs out, calling, "Sis, just wait a second. We've finally gotten everyone to sit together for once. But we've finally gotten a moment of it." Kanako says, "A movie? So that's it, you just get to be happy now? But does someone like you deserve that right anymore? I know Mum just wants us to have a little play-along harmonious relationship, so, for her, I came tonight to force some food down my throat. But, honestly, it's wrong. Because even hearing that you might be happy burns me up. Now, everyone is damned because of you. Mum, she lost the shop that she and Dad worked so hard to start together. Me, I can't even show my face at university anymore, let alone study." As Takashi says, "I'm so sorry." Kaneko says, "And your best friend you left behind? Ken-kun, wasn't it? Well, his older brother was in the same year as me," and Takashi says, "And? What happened to Ken-chan?" Kaneko says, "How about you ask him yourself? That is, if he'd even want to talk to you again." The next day at school, Takashi says to himself, "She was right about everything. I have no right to any of this happiness. All I bring is pain. It's a natural consequence of me. Ken-chan, what happened to you in the end?" Just then Ohan comes over, saying, "Yamasaki, don't catch what you were saying. Why are you zoned out?" Yamasaki Takashi says, "I'm sorry." Ohan says, "Actually, I wanted to chat about an incident I heard about. Apparently in our year, a student completely wrecked a teacher." Yamada says, "Oh, so you finally read about that, huh?" Mukui says, "Same age as us, huh?" Ohan says, "I don't know, it just suddenly came to mind." Mukui says, "Apparently not long ago, a teacher was beaten until his head was badly injured. That boy was a..." Ohan says, "That's right. And this guy? He's the same age as us." Yamada says, "Wow, our generation really are monsters, huh? Ohan says, I wouldn't say that. Mukwai says, can you imagine that the mind of a guy who murders a teacher he only dislikes is now free in society? As Yamada says, dude, shut up, that's kinda scary. Ohan says, truly an outstanding fool. That kind of monster could spend a whole lifetime and never make good on his actions. Suddenly, Ohan sees Takashi is spaced out. So he says, ah, Yamasaki, are you okay? Just then, Itakura comes in front saying, move it! Maybe you might want to give people a way to get past you, huh? As they move away, Mukui says, I'm sorry. As Itakura passes, she gives a side look to Takashi, making Ohan say, Yamasaki, do you even know her? Takashi says, I can't even begin to imagine how. Yamada says, that's class 4's Itakura. Mukui says, oh, so she's in our class, huh? Ohan says, so isn't she supposed to be as tough as leather, that one? Yamada says, there hasn't been a single good rumor about her since she got here. As Yamada says, I think it's best if we just spend our time however we want. So by that opinion, want to go sing karaoke with me? Takashi says, I'm very sorry, I'm afraid I have a part-time job to attend. As Takashi was working, he says in his mind, keep hiding, huh? So that case is still getting brought up again and again. Maybe they'll read about it on the internet when they go home. I wonder if they'll examine the photo closely. Surely they can't be certain from an old photo, right? Just then, the store owner Nakai says, all right, Yamasaki, you can get off work now. As Takashi says, ah, okay then. He says in his mind, what if someone brings my identity to light? As he was on his way back home, Yamada calls out, Yamasaki-kun, I'm here. Takashi says, so you didn't go to karaoke in the end, huh? Yamada says, ah, everyone's already gone home. I was just hoping I might run into you. You see, Yamasaki, compared to when I entered the school, you just get taller and taller. Takashi recalled when Sasaki said, growing ever taller. I used to be the same height as you since primary school. Seeing Takashi zoned out, Yamada says, huh? What's wrong? Takashi says, nothing is wrong. Yamada says, hey, Yamasaki-kun, I have always wanted to ask you something. Do you think I'm… Just then, Ohan says, look here. Two people together. Mukui says, are we disturbing you two? Yamada says in her mind, of course you're disturbing us, you imbecile. Ohan says, must be tiring to moonlight as well, huh? Ah, right, so about the film, I think it's best we go at 3 o'clock on Sunday. Seeing Takashi is zoned out, he says, Yamasaki, just what is going on inside your head recently? Mukui says, if something is going on, you know you can come to me, right? I'll always find a way to listen, yeah? As Takashi says, ah, thanks, mate. He says in his mind, I don't want to lose this, even if I'll never be able to be forgiven. Today I just got to be with my friends walking home. Meanwhile, the anonymous person says, as he uploads Takashi's latest information on the internet, go rot in prison. As Takashi wakes up screaming, his mother calls out, Takashi, why are you screaming? Takashi says, sorry, it's nothing. In school, Takashi says in his mind, today is the anniversary of that teacher's death. Every year, on this day, I relive that nightmare again. I do anything to forget, but I can't. What happened that day? Just then, Mukui calls out, hey Yamasaki, man, why are you just standing there with a face like your soul is dying or something? Or maybe tell me what you're planning. As Takashi says, I'm not. Yamada comes over saying, maybe you couldn't sleep? Couldn't sleep all night because you were thinking of me? As Mukui says, man, you're so damn lucky. Yamada says, I am lucky. Mukui says, looking at Ohan, don't worry, just some people are a little jealous today, right? Mukui says to Ohan, why are you stressing out so much? Ohan says, who's stressing out? I'm not. Takashi says, huh? CD ? Yamada says, you forgot to bring it? You told me yesterday that you wanted me to listen to it. Recalling, Takashi says, oh yes, that. I'm so sorry. When we go home, I'll give it to you. Oh, but our homes aren't even in the same direction. Yamada says, huh? Did I just manage to invite myself over to his? Mukui says, what are you guys talking about? As Yamada pushes Takashi, she says, nothing. Not a thing. I've never even spoken. Then she says in her mind, I won't let a chance like this get ruined by you. Mukui says, what's up with those two? Just then he hears someone say, hey, what do you think of that person? Looking back, Mukui sees it's Ohan, who says, showing his phone. So this morning a lot of information is leaking online. I initially didn't trust it. However, this is Yamasaki, isn't it? As Yamada enters Takashi's bedroom, she says in her mind, oh, I got in. So this is Takashi-kun's private space, huh? As Takashi says in his mind, I was just going to grab the CD for her. As Yamada sits down, she says, so, what do you want to do now? Takashi says, what? You're not going home? Yamada says, I guess I don't want to head home at the moment. Come on, sit down. As Takashi sits beside Yamada, she places her hand on his hand. So Takashi says in his mind, what is even going on here? As Yamada gets closer, she says, God, my heart is going wild. Yamada takes hold of Takashi's hand and places it on her chest, saying, see. Takashi says, freaking out, Yamada, wait a second. Yamada says, getting closer. Takashi-kun, let's make out. That is, if you want to, because I really like you. And that's all the reason I need. Let's do something comforting together. As she was about to get closer, her phone rings. So she takes the call saying, what the hell do you want? Mukui says, hey, Yamada. As Yamada says, so, this is your doing? Why are you calling at such a bad time? Mukui says, are you with Yamasaki? Yamada says, that's right, I'm in his house. Mukui says, get the hell out of there, right now. That house is. Meanwhile, Takashi says, Yamada is taking her time. But just now, she wanted to be with me. If she hadn't answered the phone, we would be. Just then, Yamada comes back saying, Mr. Takashi, did you try to trick me? As Takashi says, what? Yamada says, yesterday, that case, it's all over the internet. Boy A, Takashi, that's you, isn't it? As Takashi was about to say sorry, Yamada yells running out, liar! Takashi calls out, saying, Yamada, please wait a second. As Yamada was running out, she fell from the stairs, wounding her forehead. Seeing her, Takashi comes over, saying, Yamada, are you okay? As Takashi says, you're bleeding. Let me take you to a hospital. Yamada says, don't come near me, murderer. As Takashi sees the news, he says in his mind, what is this? Who doesn't know? My classmates, the teachers, the media, everything from today is ruined. The next day at school, Idano says, did you hear about Yamada? Aoi says, yeah, she came home with broken bones. Everyone heard Yamasaki chasing her through the streets, shouting, so who or what is he really? Seeing Mukui, Takashi says, good morning. Yamada, is she? Mukui says, at best, she'll have scars. As they pass by, Takashi says, I am sorry to have scared you. As Itakura says, oh, exposed. Over at another school, a random student girl says, hey, have you guys seen this? Another girl says, it's about a boy, right? The first girl says, that incident with the teacher happened pretty close to here, right? Another one says, apparently the killer is in Chiba. Just then a boy says, hey, Sasaki, did you see this? The girl says, no, don't. Realizing the boy says, so in summary, the other victim in that case. No way. Is that really true? Meanwhile, at the office, Principal Endo says, this incident that involves Ms. Yamada, the incident where she ended up falling. According to Ms. Yamada's statement, it was caused entirely by you pursuing her aggressively. Is that true, Mr. Yamasaki? Takashi says, it's true that I chased her, but I didn't mean for her to fall or hurt herself. Edno says, but when she fell, Ms. Yamada stated that she felt you've given off the impression of wanting to murder her. Takashi says, murder? Why would she think I'll do something like that? Meanwhile, back in class, a student says, why would we even accept him in the first place? Another one says, so he's a junior in class 1. That's depressing. Just then, Yamada comes as one boy says, hey, Yamada. Yamada says, the doctor said there is some swelling around my eye. A boy says, is there any other serious problem? Yamada says, no, it's just a little painful, that's all. Mukui says, damn, he should just go ahead and quit school now. Ohan says, I can't believe he would do something like this to a girl. It's damn terrifying, Yamada says, but I knew the moment I saw his face that it was true. I could see him considering whether or not to kill me to shut me up. It was like he's planning to do something to me. He was probably going to rape me. Takashi comes in yelling, how could you even think of something like that? Yamada says, oh God, please help. As Ohan says, dude, look at his eyes, he's not even human. Later on at the part-time job, Takashi says, I don't need to come back anymore. Nakai says, yeah, Yamasaki, I guess you've been a decent guy here, but the phone has been off the hook. And it seems that fewer and fewer customers have been coming. You see, there are rumors that we're involved in some shady business. Nakai says, don't worry, I don't believe any of it, okay? But this is our reality now. As Takashi says, thank you for giving me the chance, sir. I owe you. As Takashi comes home, he says in his mind, I guess Mum doesn't know anything yet. Guess I'd better lay my cards on the table, that I don't want to go back to school. As Mrs. Ogura says, I'm glad that you have plans to go to the cinema with your friends. Takashi says in his mind, at least Mum isn't scared of me. No, I can't let this his mind. That is all she is hoping for. I won't let her cry over me again. Then he says to his mother, yeah, I'm super excited about it. The next day, Sasaki joins the school. As she was walking, she says, in her mind, I won't let him get away again. There are things that I absolutely must say to him. Just then she hears Mukui say, the liar? Ohan says, yeah, I can't believe he'd actually show his face again. The ultimate scum. Yamada says, yeah, the vice principal is scared he'll come back for revenge. Ohan says, so that whole cinema trip is dead in the water, right? Yamada says, about the movie, did you refuse properly? Mukui says, don't you worry about it, you'll never have to even think of him again. Just then, another student says, here he comes, the fool. He still dares to come to class. Another one says, he'd better run off and just die. Another one says, you're right, a murderer should stay in prison. Sasaki gets shocked on seeing Takashi as she says in her mind, is this what he is going through every single day? As Sasaki calls out, Takashi sees her and says, Sasaki-san? It's been 3 years. Sasaki says, Takashi-kun, why did everything become like this? You must hate me, right? Takashi-kun, after you were arrested, I never got a chance to tell you. When I was about to be destroyed, Takashi says, I wanted to see you. All I wanted was to see you again. As they go to the side to talk, Takashi says, Nantoku High School? Isn't that the top of the local school district? That's seriously impressive stuff, Sasaki-san. Sasaki says, Takashi-kun, are you really okay with me after all of this? Takashi says, I won't lie to you and say my life in school is easy, but seeing you now, Sasaki-san, it was all worth it. As Sasaki recalls what the students were saying about him, she says, Takashi-kun, hey, how about we exchange numbers? As Sasaki was on her way back home, she says in her mind, I'm so sorry, Takashi-kun. I truly understand how Takashi-kun feels. Since primary school, to endure the destruction of his life and still worry about protecting me, just then a boy comes over wishing Sasaki. She says in her mind, therefore it's hard to tell him that I already have someone I love. As Sasaki comes home, she receives a text from Takashi asking if she would want to go to the aquarium together. The next day at school, Sasaki says to herself, on one hand, I know Takashi-kun is actually excited for this, but on the other hand, my feelings are toward Senpai. As Sasaki talks with Senpai, she says in her mind, what do I do? Senpai is finally asking me to go with him somewhere. God, I want to go with him. But as Sasaki recalls how everyone treats Takashi, she says, I am truly sorry. But this Saturday, I have plans. As Sasaki walks away, she says in her mind, just think, because of who do you get to have such a wonderful life? I'm utterly shameless, aren't I? Because right now, Takashi-kun only has me to stand beside him. As Sasaki and Takashi were enjoying at the aquarium, Sasaki says in her mind, thinking Takashi might still be liking her. I do have someone I like, but I'm too scared. I can't bring myself to date him. I can't bring myself to let a male touch me without fear. Even thinking about dating is enough to set me off. I absolutely can't let anyone know about what was done to me, about Senpai. On the way back home, Takashi says in his mind, man, today was such a good day. At first I was really worried about the whole thing, but asking her turned out all right. Sasaki should be home by now. Just then he sees a writing on the store's wall. He sees his mother bowing to the landowner. I utterly apologize again. I will remove it as quickly as possible. I am sorry. We trouble you this much. I wish I could apologize 10 times more. Seeing her, Takashi says, I couldn't understand why someone innocent had to pay and bear the burden, and why they chose to not end it all. Meanwhile, Itakura calls Sasaki saying, I saw you today, and I saw who you sat in the cafeteria with, that boy. As Takashi enters, he says, Mum, Mrs. Ogura says, I already knew everything had leaked online, but I had hoped to spare you from it. I had hoped to face this all bravely. I told myself as long as you were happy at school, but you can't deny reality. Takashi smiles, saying, it's okay, really, because I really am doing great. Although this news has set the school off, everyone who matters told me, it's okay. As he recalls what they all said, he says, smiling, so yeah, there's no need to cry over me again, right? Mrs. Ogura says, what on earth happened on that day, Takashi? Meanwhile, Itakura meets Sasaki as Sasaki says, it is just as you said. Yes, I was with that boy from that incident yesterday. Itakura says, but I don't know why. Sasaki, you were a witness in that murder. Surely seeing and getting closer to that murderer again should be the last thing you want. Perhaps he is forcing you. Sasaki lashes out saying, it's absolutely not like that. He is nothing like how it is online or how people talk about him. I've known him since we were in primary school. He is living in the most difficult circumstances every day. Itakura says, Sasaki, you really are the kindest person, aren't you? But you're reckless. It's dangerous. I'm sorry. I don't know you well enough to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Sasaki says, no thank you for your concern. You really don't need to worry about me this much, but this is between me and him. So do me a favor, keep this between us, okay? Meanwhile, in class, Takashi sees Yamada with the boys, so he says in his mind looking at Yamada, she knows where I live, so it could be Yamada. The posts online don't include my address, so that means the graffiti is. Seeing him, Yamada says, what are you looking at? Takashi says, oh, sorry. By the way, yesterday night someone graffitied my house. Yamada reacts, saying, huh? So what? You're accusing me of doing it? Someone like me can't do anything like that. I wouldn't spend a second in any place you live. As Takashi says, I'm sorry. Mukui says, since you want to talk, how is your relationship with your sister recently? It seems she works in a nightclub nowadays. Ohan says, yeah, I've heard that you can buy her online. Mukui says, how long until she's doing blue? Takashi gets angry, saying, say that again and I'll shut you up. A student calls loud, quick, Someone call a teacher. Just then, Itakura comes over saying to Takashi, looks like he shut up, yeah? As they come out, Takashi calls out to Itakura, saying, thank you for bringing me to my senses. Itakura says, did I? I didn't want to get involved with you, but it seems I have. All right, bye then. As Takashi says, hey, wait! Itakura says, I understand why you lost your temper. After all, everyone loves to make a villain, but you don't look like a person who could kill without a reason. Takashi recalls his conversation with his mother as she said, what on earth happened on that day, Takashi? Takashi, you do not even have a hint of being capable of finishing or even hurting someone else without a reason. Maybe it's a mother's love, but I don't think I'm wrong. You are still the same little boy you once were. Takashi says, I am sorry. There was no reason. Whatever else, I'm truly sorry. I am going to look and see if there is any new graffiti. The next day at school, Sasaki calls Takashi, saying, Takashi-kun, someone, a classmate saw us. As Takashi says, what? Is everything okay? Sasaki says, she's a good person, so I think so, but I'm a little worried. Takashi says, it's okay. Sasaki, you don't want to recall what happened, and you don't want anyone else to know, so I will protect you. As he says in his mind, it's too late to turn back now. The next day, Takashi goes to join a new work. His boss Wada says, so, first day today, huh? You'll learn from your senpai for a couple of weeks, so no need to be nervous, okay? As Takashi says, yes sir. His senpai shows him how to do it. As she turns around, Takashi is shocked to see his senpai is Itakura, who says, all right, that's about it. Good luck. Seeing Itakura working, Takashi says in his mind, guess we're desperate for manpower, huh? So I have to pay attention and listen to her today. As Itakura says, I saw you during your interview, so I knew you'd come here. Be careful, I really didn't intend to get involved with you, but I know. I've known long before the internet found out who you really are. Itakura says, you're only tired because it's the first day, right? Takashi says, well, tomorrow your muscles will be sore. Takashi says, so, shall we continue what we were talking about? You told me you knew about what happened before the internet did. Itakura says, so you suspect it was me who leaked it all online then? Takashi says, not at all. I didn't even consider that. Itakura says, whether or not I'd even be able to. I guess from your perspective, you don't even know if I'm trustworthy. Figuring out who you were was easy, because I am your #1 fan. As Takashi looks shocked, she says, that is, we separate from here. Bye. Takashi calls out, hey, wait a second. Itakura says, 1st of October. Exactly 3 years ago, after you killed that man, the internet has already begun to spread information about you, and now it has finally found your school and job, and it's causing real chaos. I can feel the person's terrible obsession with you. Feels like they have quite a passionate hatred for you. The criminal. As Takashi comes home, his mother says, Takashi, I met with the landlord. Looks like our stay here is temporary. So, let's use this time to save as much money as we can for the move. Takashi says, I'm sorry, all I bring home is trouble. Mrs. Ogura says, let's eat dinner soon, so please wash your hands. Oh yes, Takashi. Today, your sister came home for a visit. Takashi says, was she doing well? Mrs. Ogura says, yeah. Says she's dating someone now. It's been a long time since I saw her smile. Takashi calls Kanako, saying, sorry, give me a second. Kanako says, Takashi. As Takashi says, I'm sorry for this being so late at night. Kanako says annoyed, do you need something? Takashi says, I just wanted to truly apologize to you. What they're writing on the internet doesn't only affect me, but it has also dragged you along with me. I'm really sorry. Kanako says, is that all? My boyfriend's over. I'm gonna hang up. Takashi says, please wait, I'm not done. About that business with Ken-kun? Have you heard anything since? After our talk, I tried calling his house, but I can't get through to him. Kanako says, Takashi, because you are the reason that boy can't go to school anymore. Apparently he is convinced you're not a murderer, so he defended you. Spoke up for you daily, and because of that, he is now isolated. Can you even imagine the targeting? At least that's what his older brother told me. Takashi says, shocked. Bullying. For my sin. Ken-kun was. Kanako says, for his closest friend, he destroyed his own life. He probably holds a grudge against you, right? Well, goodbye then. Takashi goes to meet Ken and says in his mind, it's been 3 years since I saw him. I'll see Ken-chan again. Just gotta pass the middle school quickly. To be honest, I still feel uncomfortable, a little shy walking around here, but this is the main way to get to Ken-chan's house. As Takashi stops at the entrance of the school, old memories flooded him, causing him to feel sick. So he runs off. Finally, Takashi reaches Ken's home and rings the bell saying, it's me, Ogura Takashi. Ken's mother says, please leave. As Takashi refuses, he says, I'm begging you. Please let me meet him once. There's something I need to tell him. Ken's mother says, tell him. What good could come now from letting you speak? It's all your fault that my son's life has been utterly destroyed. Go home, Takashi pleads. Then please, let me apologize once. I'm begging you. As Ken looks from the stairs, he says, let him come in, and heads back up. As Takashi enters Ken's room, he gets shocked on seeing a disheveled Ken standing in front of him. As Takashi says, shocked, Ken. Ken says, it's okay. It's horrible, isn't it, Takashi? In just 3 years, I've become like this. As Takashi says, sorry, I heard from my sister what happened, that you stood up for me when no one else would, and how you suffered for it. Ken recalls the time he got targeted at school. He says, you know, the last half of that year was like hell. And of course, no one wants to know anyone associated with you. So after a while, it gets easier to stay in. Takashi says, why would you go so far for me? Ken says, why? Because we're friends, right? At least, I thought so. So, that incident, I know you must have had a reason. Seeing Takashi is reluctant to tell, Ken says, don't worry. I won't force you to say anything you don't want right now. Whatever time you need to take to tell me, I can wait. Oh, that reminds me, Takashi, do you want to swap contact information because I don't have anyone else to do it with? Takashi says in his mind, I am so ashamed of myself. Even at the midnight hour, you're my closest friend. Sorry for doubting you. Ken-chan. Seeing the post on the internet, he says, but then who the hell is putting my info online? Just then, a new post gets posted online of himself. He sees Ken was on his phone. So Takashi says, Ken-chan, what are you doing on your phone? As Takashi grabs Ken's phone, he says, was it really you putting it all online, Ken-chan? Shocked, Ken says, I just wanted to send you a quick text, but what did I do? As Takashi says, I'm sorry. It's just, Ken says, what did you think I was doing? Did you think that the one who betrayed you to the world, that it could be me? Is this why you came to see me? As Ken hits Takashi, he says, don't mock me. You know I've always believed in you, right? That you're still my best friend. And yet, as Takashi was leaving, Ken says, why the hell are you wearing a school uniform while I'm living like this? Just another murderer. As Takashi comes out, he cries, saying, he was innocent why couldn't I trust him? When he said, I know you must have had a reason. At that moment, I would have told him everything. To Ken-chan, I need to tell him for him to listen to me. I'm not a murderer. As Sasaki was with the girls, she gets a call from Takashi, so she says, sorry, I have to take this. As she comes out, she says to Takashi online, sorry for calling you all of a sudden. Sasaki says, no, what's the matter? Takashi says, I'm in Yokohama right now. I came to see Ken-chan. Someone's leaked my information on the internet. I suspected Ken-chan. I'm a piece of dirt, right? I even thought he was writing about meeting me. I don't know anymore. As Sasaki says, Takashi. Takashi says, Sasaki-san, I want to see you. I'm really damn defeated. I want to talk to you directly. Sasaki says, got it. Where are you? Takashi says, I'm at the place where my house used to be 3 years ago. As Takashi looks at the writing on the wall, he recalls what really happened that day. As Takashi hit Yamashita, Yamashita said, what the hell are you doing to your teacher? What the damn hell? Will you promise me something, Ogura? Don't tell anyone what you've seen here. Takashi says, shocked. Why would you? As Yamashita grabs Takashi, saying, I didn't hear you promise me. All right, Ogura, I've taken a video. A video of Sasaki deranged. You don't want to see her disgraced like that, right? Takashi yells out, Sasaki-san, hurry up and get out. Sasaki picks Takashi's bat and strikes again and again on Yamashita's head, finishing him. As Takashi says, is he finished? Sasaki keeps saying, sorry, what did I do? What the hell did I do? Takashi recalled when a news anchor said, children under 14 can't be charged with crimes. He recalled the people saying, the restriction of the Juvenile Act? Its intention is certainly to protect and rectify the youth, but it's been criticized for protecting young criminals too much, especially those under 14 plus. Takashi said in his mind at the time, I can't be charged. Takashi gets up and says, Sasaki-san, I'll protect you. Tell them that I killed the teacher. So don't worry, we'll see each other soon. Takashi said in his mind, because of the Juvenile Act, it'll take some time before things go to normal. I've got to frame myself. The police will investigate this. I have to protect her. Tell them until the very end that I killed him. The damn man isn't human. If I remember this sensation, I'm sure I can take this to the very end. As Takashi comes out of his flashback, Sasaki says, sorry, maybe we shouldn't meet in this area. Someone saw us together earlier. They were pretty suspicious. Takashi says, I understand. Sorry for that. The information is being leaked constantly. Meeting with me is dangerous. Hey, Sasaki-san, do you remember what actually happened that day? Sasaki says, not yet. The last thing I remember was the moment I met your eyes. My next memory is lying in the hospital bed. I learned about what happened from the TV. I realized right away you killed the teacher to protect me. I don't remember. Takashi says, that's fine. It was a gruesome scene. As Sasaki says, yeah. Takashi says in his mind, and if your memories do come back, you won't be able to accept the truth because you were the killer. As Takashi disconnects the call, he says in his mind, it'll be 10 p.m. by the time I get home. I need to tell my mom. As Takashi was on his way back to the station, he sees Sasaki and was about to call her when Sugita calls out, Sasaki? Sasaki smiles, saying, Senpai. Sugita says, are you going home? Sasaki says, yeah, if I went to the art shop it would get too late. Sugita says, anyhow, do you want to go get some coffee? I wanted to show you the theme of my painting too. Seeing her looking confused, he says, "Ah, do you need to be somewhere?" Sasaki says, smiling, "No, let's get coffee." As Sasaki leaves with Sugita smiling, Takashi says in his mind, "Hey, Sasaki-san, I defended you that day because I thought you would fall apart if I didn't. I'm an idiot. Your life has already returned to normal and you haven't left any place for me." He recalls the suffering his sister Kanako, his mother and Ken, had to face because of this. Flashback sees Sasaki in the hospital as reporter Kobayashi says, so she can't remember anything about Ogura Takashi finishing the homeroom teacher. As Sasaki says, "Sorry." Reporter Asumi says, so he got into a quarrel with the teacher and then ran into him while getting ready for his club. That's what the boy said. But do you remember anything about it? Sasaki says in her mind, "That's not right. Takashi-kun killed that teacher for my secret. I can't say it." As the reporters leave, Sasaki's mother says, maybe it's better that she doesn't remember anything. "Yui, it's fine if you can't remember." Suddenly, Sasaki feels sick, as she says in her mind, "I didn't have the courage to say it." And there's evidence of his actions on that cell phone. But the policeman didn't know about it. The whole country would know that I was deflowered. Before reporting the crime, Takashi-kun must have destroyed the cell phone. In the end, I was a coward. Prioritized my own life. Back to the present, Sugita says, "Do you find that painting interesting?" Sasaki says, "Senpai, somehow it feels nostalgic. It's just like the first time I met you. Your voice sounded just like that." Sugita says, blushing, "Damn, you must have thought I was a creep." Sasaki says, "No, not at all." Sugita says, "But sorry about that, for trying to invite you to the art club back then. You just seemed like..." Sasaki says, "No, you didn't know that I was involved with that incident. And anyway, I'm happy that I got to meet you." Sugita says, "Sasaki-san." Hey, just then Sasaki's phone rings, so Sugita says, "Ah, your phone?" Sasaki says, "Sorry." As she was about to go out, Sugita says, "Is it fine if you take the call in here?" Sasaki stops, as Takashi says online, "Sasaki-san, is now a good time?" Sasaki says, "Takashi-kun, sorry, I'm kind of..." Takashi says, "I get it. You can't meet me today, right? I thought it over last night, about the guy you were with last night." As Sasaki gets shocked and says in her mind, "He saw us yesterday." Takashi says, "Do you still remember the shrine where I met you at the festivals all those years ago? I'll be waiting for you after school. See you." As Takashi disconnects, Sugita calls out, "Sasaki." Seeing her trembling, he says, "Hey, what happened?" Sasaki says, "Nothing, I'm fine." As she says in her mind, "What do I do? What do I say to Takashi-kun?" Sugita takes a step forward and hugs Sasaki, saying, "Sasaki." But suddenly, Sasaki sees Yamashita hugging her as Sugita says, "You don't have to act strong with me. Let's just talk it out." Sasaki suddenly pushes Sugita away, saying as she trembles, "I sorry," and runs off. As Sasaki was running down the street, she says in her mind, "Why does his face come to mind? Even though I was hugged by the person I like, why do I find it disgusting?" The next day at the shrine, seeing Sasaki, Takashi says, "Sasaki-san, sorry for calling you out all of a sudden. I wanted to speak to you directly. The guy you were with yesterday, do you like him?" As Sasaki says, "Yes, but..." Takashi says, "That's nice. You look like you're having a lot of fun with an ordinary life, with ordinary relationships." Sasaki says, It's not that I'm having fun." Takashi says, getting angry, "Really? It looked like you were having one hell of a time yesterday. It's like nothing ever happened. The truth is, you..." Then, Takashi says in his mind, "The truth is, you killed him. I only framed myself for the crime." Then realizing he was going to tell Sasaki, who has forgotten, his head begins to hurt as he says, "No, that's not it." His face was smashed in. "My family and Ken-chan got damned to hell. It's a goddamn felony." Seeing Takashi going crazy, Sasaki says in her mind, "I drove him into this state." Sasaki says, "It's all my fault. Is it too late to confess?" "If you want to." Takashi says, "I don't want to. I just want to." With Sasaki-san. On calming down, Takashi says, "I didn't ask you this earlier. Are you going out with that guy?" Sasaki says, "When he touches me, I remember the moment I was deflowered. Even people I like look like him. I've understood that love is impossible for me no matter who it's with. I rejected him." Takashi says, "Sasaki-san, you were only 13. Being deflowered, I can't imagine it. Nobody can imagine it. But I still love you. I don't care if you reject me. More than anyone else, I will accept all of you." Sasaki says, "I don't know how to respond to your feelings, but thank you." Takashi smiles as he says in his mind, "This is fine, even if it's slow." Meanwhile, over at the editorial department, Asumi says, "Kobayashi-san, you're not going home yet." Kobayashi says, "Nah, just a little bit more." As Asumi leans over and sees the PC screen, he says, "Boye's SNS?" He seems to have grown pretty calmly. Kobayashi says, "Do you really think this was the guy? What I'm trying to ask you is, do you really think that boy A killed someone?" As Sasaki comes to school, she recalls when Takashi said, More than anyone else, I will accept all of you, she says in her mind. Takashi-kun knows about my past. Perhaps I might actually be happy if I were with him, but I wonder if it's possible to get along with a man without letting him touch me. I'm terrified. I don't know if I'll still see visions of that man instead of Takashi-kun. Just then, Higura calls out, Sasaki-san, as Sasaki says, Higura-san, good morning. Higura says, forget that. Have you heard the rumor going around that you dumped Senpai? Apparently, a girl saw you push him away. What the hell happened? As Sasaki says in her mind, I was seen. She hears some random girls talking. I thought so, but you know, she's usually not that bad of a person. As Sasaki says to herself, if you get that close to a guy, he's going to misunderstand. As another girl says, it was definitely her fault. Just then, the girls see Itakura, who says, you're a little too loud. I'm in a bad mood right now. One of the girls says, Itakura-san. No, we were just, Itakura says, talking behind people's backs? I hate people like you. Apologize. As the girls say, sorry, Sasaki-san. As Sasaki says, no need. I'm fine. Then she says to Itakura, thanks, Itakura-san. Itakura says, no problem. Also, do you have a moment? As the girls go to the side, Itakura says, things have been rough lately, right? Sasaki says, yeah? Did you want to talk to me about Senpai? Itakaru says, yes, but more importantly, I want to talk to you about Boy A. Seeing Sasaki is shocked, Itakaru says, I'd hate to believe this, but are you still in contact with Boy A? Sasaki says, what makes you think that? Itakaru says, earlier, when we were at the karaoke place, didn't you take a phone call? Right after that, I went to the bathroom. I couldn't hear much over the noise, but something was off about your expression. Seeing Sasaki's shocked look, Itakaru says, he really is coercing you, isn't he? Sasaki retaliates, saying, no, that's not true. He's not that kind of person, and you're wrong about the phone call incident. Sorry, I've got to go. As Sasaki runs off, Itakaru says to herself, she's really bad at lying, huh? I'll protect you though, Yui-chan. Meanwhile, as Takashi was sitting in class, he says in his mind, when I think about it, I basically confessed yesterday, right? Just then, Itakaru comes over scaring Takashi as he says, Itakaru-san, what are you doing? Itakaru says, I'm just impressed that even in these depressing days, you still have some color in your cheeks. Awesome boy A. Takashi says in his mind, she's definitely not praising me. Then he says to her, can I do anything for you? Itakaru says, yeah, it's about work. Would you mind taking my shift on Sunday? Takashi says, Sunday? Yeah, I think that's fine. Itakaru says, that's great. You really saved me. Just then Yamada yells out, gone? My purse is gone. Mukwai says, no way. Ohan says, did you look everywhere? Yamada says, I did. Uhan says, could you have dropped it somewhere? Yamada says, I used it at the cafeteria and I definitely had it in 5th period. Mukui says, 5th period? Music, right? Ohan says, let's go check if you dropped it at the cafeteria. Seeing Takashi, Yamada says, would you mind showing me what's in your bag? As Itakaru says, you might have framed him. We don't know if you've put it in the bag yourself. Yamada says, I would never do such a thing. As Yamada says to Takashi, give it back, thief. Give me back my purse. Just then a teacher comes holding a purse and says, purse, this? As Yamada says, my purse. Ohan says, where was it? The teacher says, beside the vending machine in the cafeteria. Yamada says, ah, I see. I knew I had left it somewhere. Idana says, the hell? Isn't that pretty unfair? She definitely assumed he was the criminal. Mukui says, hey, you should probably apologize. Yamada says, I'm not apologizing. It's so ridiculous that you're even at school. Shouldn't you hurry up and quit? Don't you know how much of a problem my injury was to my parents? I don't want to have anything to do with you. Then she says in her mind, because it'll be even more dangerous if you resent me based on a misunderstanding. As Takashi says, your injury was my fault, sorry. Hearing Takashi apologize, Yamada runs off. Meanwhile, as Takashi and Itakaru were going back home, she says, the criminal treatment, right? Takashi says, well, there's nothing to be done. Itakaru says, I agree. I don't think there's anything to be done. You've killed a person. So if anything happens, you'll be the prime suspect, just like this time. As Takashi says, that's right. Itakaru says, getting annoyed. Do you regret nothing about the incident? Takashi says, Itakaru-san, see you tomorrow. As Takashi walks away, he says in his mind, I do regret it, but I had decided to save Sasaki-san. She's the one who killed that man. She definitely wouldn't be able to bear the weight of the truth, that she killed the man who deflowered her. S0, I will bear half of it for the one I love. At this rate, her memories will. Just then, the teacher calls out, Yamasaki-kun! Seeing the teacher, Takashi says, Teacher, is this about the purse incident from earlier? The teacher says, no, that's not it. Your mother was taken to the hospital. As Takashi runs off to the hospital, he says in his mind, it's all my fault. There's no doubt that all this time she's had to bear the burden of living as Boy A's mother. As he runs off to her room, he says, Mom, please be safe. As he opens the door and sees his mother, he says in his mind, "Mom, when did you lose this much weight?" Mrs. Ogura says, "There's been a lot of work recently, and there's the cost of moving too and the reparations." Takashi says, "Didn't they get waived off in the trial?" Mrs. Ogura says, "Yes, the other party suddenly dropped the case. I don't fully understand the reason behind it. I sent them a letter, but I didn't get a response. The amount would have been 120 million yen. I've been saving towards it. Of course I'm not using your part-time salary. I could never bring myself to take it. It's not an amount I could earn in my lifetime. But that's why I think it has value, because we shouldn't be able to forget about that incident for the rest of our lives." Takashi says, "Sorry, I'm going to step outside for a second." As he comes out, he says in his mind, "I can't say anything when I look into her eyes. It's always been like this. It hurts my soul. I've avoided this on purpose." Just then, Kanako comes in fury and slaps Takashi, saying, "It's your fault. It's all your fault." Takashi leaves and comes out in the garden. As he was sitting, he gets a call from Sasaki, who says, "Takashi-kun, is now a good time? What's going on?" Takashi says, "My mother collapsed. She's lost a lot of weight," he says, crying. "I never noticed how much she has changed. The moment I left the facility, I swore to start again. And so, I've made my mother bear the worst of the burden. I never even confronted her about it once." Sasaki also begins to cry as she says, "Takashi-kun, I'm sorry. Tell your mother the truth. 3 years ago, I couldn't tell you this, but your mother came to my home after the incident. After your mother left, I couldn't tell them I had been deflowered. I couldn't face the truth. I couldn't think about your family. I've been living a good life. Confess it all. I'm fine with it, even if it means that your mother goes public with the truth. Takashi-kun, I'm really sorry for these 3 years. When she's discharged, let's tell her together." Takashi says, "Yes." Meanwhile, the reporters Suguro and Kobayashi were driving in a car, as Kobayashi says, "Change of plans, kiddo." Suguro says, "I'm surprised. We were waiting at the school, but he suddenly headed for the hospital. Perhaps something happened to a relative." Kobayashi says, "I don't know. But in this state, he's never going to listen to our questions." Suguro says, "Tell me, didn't you mention yesterday that you didn't know if Boy A was the real killer?" Kobayashi says, "It's a hunch. Because that incident has smelt fishy to me from day one. Perhaps we'll be able to figure this out at the place we're headed to." Suguro says, "By the way, where are we going?" Kobayashi says, "To the victim's house." Suguro says, "Are you going to interview the victim's wife?" Kobayashi says, "I wish it was that easy. She was mentally destroyed after the incident." Suguro says, "Ah, I saw that on the news at that time. She didn't even have the energy to contest the case in court. Oh, right. She suddenly dropped the charges 3 months into the trial. Do you think you'll get the interview?" Kobayashi says, "If not, there's only one other person, the victim's only son, Yamashita Takayuki." As they arrive, Suguro says, "We're here." Kobayashi says, "The home of the victim's son, Yamashita Takayuki." As Suguro says, "Interviewing the victim's family, I'm a little nervous." Kobayashi says, "This is part of the job. Sometimes we even have to interview the culprit's family. Well, you'll get used to it eventually." Seeing no one open the door, Suguro says, "Everybody's out?" As Kobayashi says, "No." Suguro says, "But this job, huh? Say, is the son still a student? Isn't he in his 3rd year of high school?" Kobayashi says, "For now, let's wait and..." Just then, from behind them, Takayuki says, "Excuse me, are you looking for me?" Kobayashi says in his mind, "The son?" Then he says, "We wanted to speak with you for some time." As Kobayashi says, "My name is Kobayashi, from Weekly Attack. Sorry to drop by unexpectedly. Do you know what time your mother will be back?" Takayuki says, "She's not coming back. She's just been admitted to a psychiatric hospital." Kobayashi says, shocked, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Then he says in his mind, "Admitted to the hospital. I knew she was backed into a corner, but I can't believe it's gone this far." As Takayuki says, "Please leave." Kobayashi says, "Wait, do you have any thoughts on Boy A?" As Suguro says, "Kobayashi-san." Kobayashi says, "Especially in relation to his social media presence." Takayuki says, "It's aggravating. He killed my father and now my mother's falling apart because of him. It's like he's not even thinking about the feelings of his own family." As Suguro says, "Sorry for your trouble." Kobayashi says in his mind, he's very detached about it all. As Takayuki says, "Is that all?" Kobayashi says, "Sorry, one last thing. I've been wondering, when he was murdered, it was in his possession. The mobile phone." Takayuki pretends, saying, "Mobile phone?" Kobayashi says, "Yes. The police reported that the data from it couldn't be recovered. Why was it smashed up that badly with a bat? I don't understand. Was there something on it that would have been inconvenient to Boy A? Or is it something else?" Takayuki says, "What are you asking me for?" Kobayashi says, "If you have that phone in your possession, could I borrow it for just a moment?" As Suguro says, "Wait, Kobayashi-san, what are you saying?" Kobayashi says, "I know a guy, a specialist who might be able to do something with it. I'm not saying the police did a half-assed job, but..." Takayuki laughs, saying, "Pretty arrogant of you. It was rude enough to show up unannounced, but still digging into that incident even now? Just the hell stop." Kobayashi says, bowing, "You're right. It was rude of us to show up so suddenly. Please forgive me. We'll leave for now." As they were about to leave, Takayuki says, "Kobayashi-san, did you already interview Boy A?" As Kobayashi says, "No, not yet, but I'm planning to, very soon." Meanwhile, Sasaki says in her mind, "2 days later, we will be speaking the truth. If it's his mother, there'll be an official announcement for sure. The relationship with friends and parents too. It won't be able to continue like before. But even so, I've stopped running. I have to move forward." As Itakura and Takashi take leave from work, Itakura asks, "Is your mom okay now?" Takashi says, "Yeah, she leaves the hospital on Saturday." Itakura says, "The shift on Sunday. Should I take it on after all?" Takashi says, "No, it's okay. I want to work as much as possible to support my mother and make it easier for her." Just then, the gatekeeper shows them a video. Seeing Takashi's expression, Itakura says, "Is something wrong?" As Takashi leaves, he says in his mind about the video, "Damn, this is Sasaki-san. No damn way. The phone was totally smashed up at the time. If the data wasn't destroyed, then the truth about that should have gotten out long ago. So why there was a copy? If that's the case, the culprit behind the social media, it can't be." Recalling some factors, Takashi says in his mind, "The teacher's family. The horrible SNS postings are most likely. Why? Why did I rule out the possibility of the teacher's family? Do I still believe what was said back then?" Takashi goes into a flashback as he recalls saying, "To the family of the deceased." A lawyer says, "Yes, you'll be leaving around in a month. The system requires that we notify them. The news that you're returning will be a huge shock to the deceased family. I've talked a bit with the teacher's son. He wants you to return to society." As Takashi says, shocked, "What?" The lawyer says, "It doesn't happen often. Most of the times, relatives wouldn't want to even breathe the same air as the criminal. To properly answer his feelings, make sure to do your best." Back to present, Takashi says, "Those words back then, what if there was another meaning to them?" Just then, a message appears making Takashi say, "Did he want to take revenge with his own 2 hands? Sasaki-san, I've got to tell her." The next day, Itakura says to Sasaki, "Have you seen Boy A's SNS posts?" Seeing Sasaki confused, Itakura says, "What, you haven't seen it? It's going viral." As she shows the video, she says, "Isn't it terrible? This is the revenge blue or something, right? To think he's capable of such cruel things. You understand, right? That if you get involved with that guy, it's over. He hasn't been rehabilitated at all." As Sasaki begins to tremble, Itakura says, "What happened?" As Sasaki runs off, she says, "Why that picture?" and calls Takashi saying, "Takashi-kun, that picture?" Takashi says, "I'm sorry. I saw it last night, but I couldn't tell you." Sasaki says, "I still want to talk to your mother about it, but if photos with my face are leaked?" Takashi says, "I won't let that happen. My mom won't be discharged for a couple of days. Before that, I will definitely get my hands on the data." Sasaki says, "Please, you're the only one I can rely on. You can't allow anything else to be leaked." As the calls disconnects, Takashi says, "Sasaki-san, for her, I'm the only one she's got. I'm the only one." Just then, Yamada comes yelling, "Can you believe it? To do this to his own girlfriend. He's a terrible person after all." Seeing the other students also talking, Yamada says, "Good. Have all of you realized it? That guy shouldn't be here at school. He's a dangerous person." Meanwhile, Takashi says in his mind, "As I thought, I'll leave class. I know the teacher's address. I need to get that data as soon as possible. I've got to do something." Just then, Takashi gets a call from an unknown number, so he takes the call. Takayuki says online, "Nice to meet you. I'm Yamashita's son." Takayuki says, "This isn't a prank. It really is me." Takashi says, "Those posts, you're the one that made them. If you have that data, then you know about what your father did, right?" Takayuki says, "I'm going to give you some orders. The first order is to take a picture of you smiling with a girl from your class. Send the picture to this phone number within 15 minutes. As Takashi says, "What are you talking about?" Takayuki says, "If the picture isn't sent after 15 minutes, I'll post uncensored photos online." As Takashi comes to school, he thinks about asking Itakura, but says in his mind, there's no way. He'd know she's from a different class. But my school, my part-time job, when I went to see Ken-chan, he's known everything I've done so far. If he knows my class, what do I do? Anyway, is he actually serious? Isn't it evidence of his father's crimes? If he releases uncensored photos, then I don't understand just what is he thinking of. So, Takashi gets up and begins to ask the girls of his class for a photo. Just as Takashi manages to take a photo, Mukui says, "You've gone completely crazy." Just then, Yamada says, "Wait, you're kidding me." As the photo girl says, "What are you thinking? Uploading it to your SNS." As Takashi gets shocked on seeing the post, the girl begins to cry as she says, "No, I'm begging you. Please delete it. I'm begging you." Uhan says, "Do us a favor and don't come to school anymore." As Takashi comes out, he gets a call from Takayuki who says, "Well, as expected of Boy A, an absolute fiend. Do you think that girl will stop going to school?" Takashi says angrily, "Delete that post right now. You're involving complete outsiders. Why would you do that?" Takayuki says, "Don't misunderstand. I'm the one giving orders. 4 more. If you complete 4 more of my orders, I'll hand over all of Sasaki Yui's data. As Sasaki takes Takashi's call and apologizes for Itakura, Takashi says, Sasaki-san, I'm about to go get your data back. Sasaki says, you figured out who did it? Where are you? Takashi says, in front of Yamashita-sensei's house. Sasaki gets shocked as she says, hold on, someone from his family had the photos? Takashi says, yeah, before we talk to my mom tomorrow, I'll take care of any of your worries. I swear I'll get it back. I'll talk to you again after. As Sasaki says, okay, and disconnects the call. She says in her mind, even after knowing what's been done to me, they'd take those photos and exactly what are they trying to achieve? Meanwhile, as Takashi rings the bell, he says in his mind, who would have thought that I'd be visiting this household for a reason like this? Does the mother also know about the data? Or is it only the son? Seeing no one is opening the door, no one's home? Or do they no longer live here? If that's the case. Just then the door unlocks and Takayuki calls out, get in! As Takashi enters the house, he goes up the stairs saying, you're there, right? Come out here. Won't you just talk to me for real? Please give back the data. Your only target should be me. You don't have any reason to despise Sasaki-san. As he comes near the altar, Takashi says, Yamashita-sensei, as Takayuki strikes Takashi from behind but stops midway, saying, you're amazing, Takashi-kun. To be able to aim at a person's head and send a full swing, I'd never be able to do that. Takashi says, give back the data. To you, that data is. Takayuki says, that's a rule violation. To not contact me obviously includes not coming to my house. Were you too stupid to figure that one out? Also, wasn't my father murdered by you? Shouldn't an apology come first? Realizing Yamashita was Takayuki's father, Takashi says, bowing, I'm sorry. But Takayuki says, not enough. If you'd complete all my orders, Takashi says, it's as though you don't mean it at all. Then he says angrily, what orders? Stop screwing around. Your father took Sasaki-san and Takayuki says, Takashi-kun, why did my dad do those things? I won't ask you again. You can go ahead and decide for yourself. Takashi gets angry saying, you can imagine it, can't you? As Takayuki says, maybe you can. Takashi says angrily, it was rape. How Sasaki-san felt at the time, can you think? Takayuki says, then is it okay to kill? An outsider like you. Normally, after a few years, my dad would be released from prison. Did he do something worth killing him for? Wasn't it just some disheveling? As Takashi gets angry, he strikes at Takayuki as he says, nice, Takashi-kun. There's a bat right there. Finish me just like how you finished my dad. If you do, you can protect those close to you. As Takashi raises the bat, Takayuki says, hurry up and finish me. But he stops midway saying, just give me the data. I won't leave here until you do. Takayuki says, I said I'd give it to you when you complete the orders, didn't I? You'll get it soon, Takashi-kun. As Takashi says in his mind, it's probably somewhere in this house. Just then, Takayuki says, was Sasaki Yui your first love? As Takashi says, what? Takayuki says, your first love really is special, huh? It's a memory you'll never forget. He gets a little sad saying, right? Most of the time, a memory is all you get. I mean, it's true, right? Because you're supposed to meet so many people after them. That's what's different about you, because you've been isolated. Takashi says, shut up. As Takayuki says, aren't you the only one that thinks there's a special connection between you? Takashi says, that might be the case, but even then I would do anything to protect her. Takayuki says, man, you really make me sick. Don't you think it's strange? Even after realizing the reason why you did it, why do I hate you so much? It's the opposite. When I understood your motive, it only added to my fury. Takashi says, wait a second. What do you mean by? Just then he hears the police siren. As Takayuki says, it's the police. I saw you outside from a window. I called the police before you entered because I thought my life might be in danger. Takashi says, no way, until I get the data. There's no way I'm going back. I'm begging you, please. Takayuki says, think about it. This is the house of the victim's family, right? If I say you assaulted me with that bat, and you've been to a youth detention center, hurry up and escape. Otherwise, you won't be able to protect anyone. As Takashi uses the balcony to escape, he says, soon. I'll definitely be back soon. Takayuki says, don't worry, we'll meet again before that. The next day, Takashi meets Sasaki as she says, Takashi-kun. Seeing him wearing a mask, she says, are you sick? Takashi says, oh no, I've been too careless up to now. I don't want to cause you any trouble. Sasaki says, Takashi-kun. Takashi says, anyways, I'm sorry. I said I would when we talked yesterday, but I ended up not getting the data back. Sasaki says, Takashi-kun, I don't have anything but gratitude for you. Something bad could have happened to you. Thank you for going for my sake. Then Sasaki says, can I ask you something? What kind of person is that teacher's son? Even though he knows what really happened. He publicly released that photo, right? Takashi says, yeah, to be honest, I have no clue what he's thinking, but it seems like he has a deep grudge against me. Sasaki says, just for a grudge. Takashi says, Sasaki-san, you don't have to force yourself to tell my mom everything right now. After we get the data, Sasaki says, it's okay, I've resolved myself to tell her today. Meanwhile, as Kanako was going back home, she hears one passerby say, it looks like the account has finally been suspended. Another one says, boy A's SNS. Man, there was no way it was the real thing. Just then, one of them says, that's Boy A's older sister, right? Kanako was facing humility at the university as well as Takayuki comes over saying, Kanako, what's wrong? Kanako says, smiling, no, it's nothing. Then she says in her mind, it was hell, but even then I was able to look forward towards the future because I met you. Takayuki says, I want to meet your mother soon. As Takayuki entered Takashi's home with Kanako, Mrs. Ogura says, thanks you two, you've come all the way here for me. As Takayuki says, please don't mention it. Takayuki goes into a flashback as he recalls when he was sitting and his mother saying, an institution? Why not a reformation center? He's a murderer, isn't he? That's too light of a punishment for him. As Mrs. Ogura bowed and said, I am truly sorry for what happened. Takayuki's mother said, I am so sorry. Back to the present, Takayuki says in his mind, well, I guess she doesn't remember. Then he says, are we still going for dinner together after this? Meanwhile, as Sasaki and Takashi were walking, Sasaki gets a notification on her SNS and says, it's been suspended, the fake account. Takashi says, yeah, I don't know if the photo from before was the reason. It was suspended when I checked this morning, but he'll probably make another account and threaten us again. I don't think he'll give up that easily. Sasaki says, yeah, but when the time comes, don't try to run yourself into the ground, Takashi-kun. Until now, I've been relying on you. I've always been hiding far away in a safe place. I don't want to be a burden to you anymore. From now on, I'll fight with you. As Takashi comes home with Sasaki, he says in his mind, Sasaki-san, one of the truths that day that hasn't come to light until now, will tell my mom today. As they enter, Mrs. Ogura says, thank you for coming. Your sister came to greet me too. They just went to take my things to a taxi. On seeing Sasaki, Mrs. Ogura says, are you? As Sasaki says, it's been a long time. I'm Sasaki Yui. As Mrs. Ogura says, Takashi, what's happening? Takashi says, I'm sorry, Mom. I've been keeping something from you. As Mrs. Ogura says, what? Sasaki says, Takashi-kun had protected me that day. The homeroom teacher forcibly spent the night with me multiple times, Yamashita-sensei. That day, Takashi-kun killed that teacher in order to protect me. Takashi says, I'm sorry for keeping it a secret until now. You might not understand, but Mrs. Ogura begins to cry as she says, I always knew something was going on. Takashi, you would never be able to kill a person for absolutely no reason. I always believed you weren't that kind of child. Sasaki cries. She says, I'm so sorry. I had plenty of chances to tell you the truth, like that time. Mrs. Ogura says, hey, Yui-chan, there was another reason for what happened, right? As if that child could kill a person. Sasaki says, I was scared. If a girl who was a victim of harassment would face prejudice in society, I really am so sorry. Takashi says, I also didn't say anything about it to protect Sasaki-san. I didn't know if staying quiet was the right thing to do at the time. Was it a mistake? Mrs. Ogura says, it was a big mistake, Takashi. Of course it would have been hard for her too. No woman would want others to know if they've been harassed. I can understand your feelings on that. I also understand that you would want to protect her secret, Takashi. But this isn't something that just affects the two of you. What about my family or the teacher's family? You too. Haven't been thinking about those around you at all. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Takashi, this is the whole truth of that incident, right? Just then Kanako comes, and seeing Sasaki says, Mom, who's this? Takashi was about to tell, she is, but stops as he sees Takayuki, who says on seeing Takashi, nice to meet you, I'm Yamazaki, Kanako's boyfriend. As Takashi says in his mind for Takayuki, you'd go this far? Takayuki says in his mind on seeing Sasaki, Sasaki Yui, why is she here? Did they talk about something? Then Takayuki says to Mrs. Ogura, Mom, there's a taxi waiting downstairs. As Takashi says in his mind, this wasn't in the plan. I have to tell them who this guy really is. As Sasaki leaves, Kanako says, hey Mom, who was that girl? Mrs. Ogura says, she's a part-timer at the store I work at. As Takayuki says to Takashi, that's right, would you like to come to eat, Takashi-kun? Meanwhile, as Sasaki left, she says in her mind, I told her the truth. If she decides to publicly announce what happened, I'll accept that outcome. I won't run away. Just then, a medical team rolls in a patient saying, Doctor, over here. Seeing the patient, Sasaki feels bad and gets flashbacks of the incident. Meanwhile, as Takashi and the others finish dining, Takashi goes to the washroom. As Takayuki follows him, he says, Takashi-kun, Mom's getting worried. Takashi gets angry as he says in his mind, you fool. Then he says, who the hell is Yamazaki? Takayuki says, that was wise of you. You didn't tell your sister the truth. As a result, you could enjoy the meal. Takashi says, that's what you knew? When I went to Ken-chan's house and our new address and my high school, you were looking through my sister's phone. Takayuki says, yeah, your mother still keeps in regular contact with her. Their conversations were very useful to me. She was making such a pained face. The first time I went to make contact with her, her friends were keeping their distance, and she was all by herself. She must have been really lonely. It didn't take long for her to open her heart to me. She was desperately trying to keep me pleased. She's really a pitiful woman. As Takashi gets angry and grabs Takayuki's collar, Takayuki says, let go. All of this is just a result of your own actions, isn't it? Takashi says, you can't keep this up for long. The SNS accounts have already been suspended, and today I told Mother the truth about the incident. As Takayuki says in his mind, so he was telling her about it. Takashi says, there's no way you can keep it up, so you'll make an accusation even if it destroys her reputation. Takayuki says, well, it'll take a few weeks for all the formalities to come to an end though. From the start, I was never thinking of running away from it. As Kanako comes calling for them to come out. Meanwhile, as Itakura and Takashi get off work, Itakura calls out, hey, you haven't been coming to school the past few days, huh? Are you quitting? Takashi says, I haven't said yet, but I think I might. Itakura says, nothing's happened since the fake account was suspended. Aren't things looking up now? Keeping quiet, huh? Well, do what you want. Takashi says, Itakura-san, why do you always concern yourself with someone like me? Itakura says, I was able to stop myself thanks to you. I was being abused by my own father. As Takashi gets shocked, Itakura says, he'd hit me until I was bruised all over. My mother was so scared of him that she didn't do anything about it. Every day I'd think of murdering my father. That's how bad I wanted to escape that hell. It was around that time you made the rounds on the news. I thought someone my age murdered someone. It was a huge shock for me. But at the same time, seeing how fast all your personal information was exposed instilled fear in me. Seeing TV shows making content of your days, not caring about the truth, just broadcasting insults and slander for hours. After seeing that, I was able to stop myself. I thought I wouldn't want to end up like that. Takashi says, what happened with your father? Itakura says, eventually some stranger who had their suspicions contacted a child welfare center. Since then, I haven't seen my father. Takashi says, good thing I didn't murder my father. That must be what you think when you look at me now. Itakura says, I guess. But when I think about how that man is still alive somewhere, honestly, it makes my blood boil. Even though I held myself back for my own sake, my desire to murder him hasn't faded to this day. Even if I were to murder him right now with these hands, I don't think I would feel a single ounce of guilt because I'll remember what he did to me for the rest of my life. That's the reason I realized it was you. I was looking at the picture and information of Boy A more than other people. Sorry, I've been running my mouth. Well then. As Itakura runs off, Takashi says, Itakura-san, see you later. As Takashi arrives at his home, seeing Sasaki, he says, Sasaki-san, you surprised me when you said you were waiting in front of my house. Did something happen? Sasaki says, the doctor had told me before that the reason I couldn't get my memories back might be because my mind wasn't ready to accept what happened at that time. He said that my mind would break if I were to get my memories back. That's why my brain was shutting out that information. It's been a long time since then, but I've finally resolved myself to accept the truth. As Takashi says, Sasaki-san. Sasaki says, recently I've been having flashbacks of what happened that day. I was the one that made a mess of that teacher's head with that bat over and over and over. It's so vivid I can still feel the sensation of it through my hands. Takashi says, you're wrong. You're just remembering it wrong. A lot's happened recently, and you're tired. Sasaki says, really? When you said, tell them that you murdered the teacher, did I just remember that wrong too? Sasaki says, begging, please tell me the truth. I was the one that murdered him, wasn't I? I was the one that murdered that teacher, wasn't I? Takashi says, it was the two of us. I took my bat and hit the teacher first. If I had hit him in a bad spot, he would have been murdered from that, but he was alive. You hit him when he came after me. Sasaki says, then I smashed his head. Takashi says, that result was from both of us. As Sasaki says, you didn't answer the question. I was the one that murdered him, right? To cover for me, you took the bat and… Takashi says, stop it. All of that's already over. Even if that's true, is there any point in bringing it up now? Sasaki says, if that's the truth, I want to tell all of it to the police. Takashi takes hold of Sasaki and says, what the hell are you saying? Even after everything I've sacrificed to protect you, if you tell them everything… Takashi falls onto his knees. What was the point of everything I've done? As Sasaki says, Takashi-kun. Takashi says, I've thought of it countless times. What I'd do if I could relive that day. What if, when I saw what was happening to you, instead of coming in with my bat, I called over the nearest teacher I could find. I acted tough and said I did it to protect you. but I was actually just scared out of my mind. During the investigations, I thought of saying it wasn't me countless times, but I couldn't say it. I'm begging you, Sasaki says. Takashi-kun, what you did to protect me was absolutely not pointless. If I had been arrested as a criminal at that time, I wouldn't be able to handle it. I wasn't in the right state of mind for it. Because of you, I was able to put myself back together. When I saw you again 3 years later when you were all over the internet, I was honestly terrified that the world would find out that I had been deflowered. Ever since we met again, I've just been protecting myself. Even though I knew how messed up your life had gotten, no matter how much I apologize, it wouldn't be enough. I can't return to the past, but I don't want to destroy your life any more than it already is. I'm going to tell the police today. I'll be okay now. I'll live carrying the sin of murdering that man. After all, I murdered a man who was better off murdered. Takashi recalls what Itakura said. As Sasaki says, if the truth of that incident comes to light, how society treats you should change. Takashi-kun, thank you for saving me that day. As Sasaki walks away, she says in her mind, it's better this way. If I turn myself in, Takashi-kun should stop getting threatened. I want to make at least one good decision. Just then, Takayuki was dropping Kanako off at her home when he sees Sasaki, so he runs behind and says, why don't we talk for a bit? Seeing Takayuki, Sasaki says in her mind, this person was at the hospital. Then she tells him, sorry, I'm in a hurry. Takayuki says, showing her the video, let's go somewhere and chat. Sasaki Yui-san. Meanwhile, as Kanako enters and says Takayuki left and they met Sasaki, Takashi runs out calling Sasaki's number, but she doesn't respond as Takayuki says, your phone is ringing. You sure you shouldn't pick up? Seeing she is shocked, he says, we couldn't talk much at the hospital. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm the son of the teacher who deflowered you, Yamashita Takayuki. I was just thinking of paying you a visit. I've got good luck to run into you by chance. Sasaki says, you wanted to see me. Takayuki says, yeah, don't tell anybody that you were deflowered. If Takashi-kun's mom tells the police or the news, tell them you don't know anything about it. You guys talking it out at the hospital messes up my plans a little, but I still want to keep it going. This game, Sasaki says shocked. Game? Stop messing around. You know what your father did to me, right? Takayuki says, yeah, but try to relate to my feelings too. It took me 2 years to get everything ready for this plan. I won't be able to stand it if I had to stop halfway through. So don't get in my way more than you have. If you do, I'll immediately take your photos and… Sasaki laughs as she says, then your 2 years have been completely pointless. As Takayuki looks shocked, Sasaki says, because the one who murdered your father was me. Sasaki says again, I was the one who murdered your father. Takayuki says laughing, what an idiot. I was wondering what you were going to say, but all you've got is a lame joke. Sasaki says, I'm not joking. It's the truth. You're the fool here. For a completely misplaced plan for revenge, you've wasted more than 2 years of your life. In the first place, revenge for what? After learning the things your father did, why did you still want to take revenge? You two are both crazy. I hope you and your father burn in hell. As Takayuki slaps Sasaki, he says, you're really running your mouth? Do you understand the situation you're in? What do you mean that's the truth? There's no way that's… Sasaki, who fell on the floor, says, I couldn't remember this until now. After seeing something by coincidence a few days ago, I remembered what I had done that day. I hit the teacher with a bat and murdered him. Just now I met with Takashi-kun to check whether or not it was really true. He admitted it was. Takayuki says, that can't be true. Then he threw away his life for a crime he didn't even commit? He even sacrificed his own family. Sasaki says, the decision we made that day, I think it wasn't the right one, but I don't regret murdering him with my own 2 hands. You can't even imagine it, can you? The hell I was going through, the horrible feelings I had to deal with. To be let free only after a few years isn't nearly enough. Your father is someone who deserved to be murdered. I'm about to tell the police everything I did that day. Meanwhile, as Takashi comes out looking for Sasaki, he says in his mind, with how much time has passed, she couldn't have gone far. Sasaki-san. Just then, Sasaki calls, so Takashi takes the call, saying, Sasaki-san, as Takayuki replies, sorry, it's just me. Takashi says, why do you have her phone? What did you do to Sasaki? Takayuki says, I heard everything, that she killed my father. All right, you still on the line? As he was holding Sasaki, he says, come to the park that's closest to the railway station. It's my last order. If you don't hurry, she's going to get hurt. Takashi says, stop, don't touch her. As Takashi comes to the park, he sees Takayuki is seated beside Sasaki. As Takashi says, you, Takayuki says, stay right there. This is for self-defense. Of course, I'd carry one in case boy A came after me, right? Takashi again says, stop. As Takayuki says, this will be the last time we meet. Let's take our time and have a nice talk. Takashi says, it's true that she murdered that teacher, but you can understand why she did it, right? Why are you doing such a thing? Takayuki says, why? What about you? Why did you do such a thing? Takayuki says, at first I was angry at the way my father had been murdered, but after a while and after I learned the reason behind that incident, my anger was directed at something else. It was directed at your cruelness. For some worthless, fleeting child's crush, you threw away your family. For 3 whole years. While you were in that facility, I kept an eye on your family. They are genuinely upstanding people, especially your mother who, even knowing that you were boy A, still believed in you and looked forward to having you come home. To be honest, I was jealous. I'm adopted after all. Takashi looks shocked. As Sasaki says, adopted? Takayuki says, I don't even know my real parents' faces. I was abandoned as soon as I was born. I was always alone. Every day I would dream of the moment that some kind-hearted adults would come and take me from that place. After a while, they appeared. My father may have committed a crime, but even then, he was part of the family that I had finally gotten. You are not guaranteed to have a family. You don't understand the importance of one at all. Takashi says, you're right. I've done things to my family that I can never take back. I definitely shouldn't be forgiven for that. Please, put down that knife. As they begin to hear the sirens, Takayuki says, the police? Did you call them? Takashi says, that's right. Takayuki says, is that so? I guess you've learned a thing or two. Taking any credibility you had within society, making your best friend hate you, destroying your bonds with family. I thought my plans were going well, but I didn't expect some crazy development like this. It's not how I planned, but I've got to have this girl pay for the crime of murdering my father. As Takashi says, stop it. Takayuki says, Takashi-kun. Oh, that's right. I forgot one thing. I'm turning 18 next month. Then Takayuki strikes at Sasaki, saying, I've still got the rights of a minor. As Sasaki was rushed to the hospital, the nurse says she's been hurt in several places in the abdomen and is currently unconscious. Meanwhile, Sasaki's mother was crying, why did this happen to our daughter? As Sasaki's father says, don't worry, she's our daughter. She'll definitely pull through. Meanwhile, over at the police station, Detective Ikegami says, just say something already. Yamasaki Takashi-kun. No. Boy A. We know who the assailant is. Isn't he the son of the teacher you killed 3 years ago? He confessed to stabbing her, but he won't say anything else. Why did he go after the girl instead of you? Detective Ikegami gets angry as he bangs his hand on the table, saying, how long do you think you can keep quiet? Just then, Officer Nobiro comes, saying, Ikegami-san, his mother has come. He's only a witness in this case, investigating him any further that this is. Just then, Mrs. Ogura says, Takashi, I was contacted by the police. Your sister was also called. Apparently, the man who was arrested called her frequently, according to his phone call history. The police seem to know something about it. Takashi, have you always known who that man really was? Takashi says, I knew. Mrs. Ogura said, you knew and kept it a secret? Even when the 4 of us ate together, while your sister was happily enjoying herself. You told me at the hospital, didn't you? The truth of what happened that day? Was that a lie? I can't trust what you say anymore. Your sister's here at the police station too. She's pretty shaken up. It would be bad if I don't stay by her side. I don't think she wants to see your face. I feel the same way. As Takayuki says to himself, I'm curious. In the end, what decision will you come to? Will Takashi choose Sasaki or his mother? As Takashi recalled when the medical team came, they said, we currently don't know if she's conscious. It seems she's been stabbed a few times, so it's pretty bad. As Takashi was walking away, saying to himself, the media are already at the hospital. What could I do even if I go there? Just then, Kobayashi calls, Takashi-kun? Seeing he's a reporter, Takashi begins to run as Kobayashi calls out, ah, wait! The culprit behind this incident. Isn't he the son of the teacher that was murdered 3 years ago? As Takashi stops, Kobayashi says, it really was him. There hasn't been an official statement from the police yet, but I had a bad feeling about it. I talked to that teacher's son around a week ago. I sensed that there was something off about him. I followed him for a while. But I think he caught on to me and shook me off. I paid a visit to the mother, but I couldn't find any clues. I was too careful. If only I had talked to you about it sooner. Takashi says, nothing would have changed. By the time you would have contacted me, there would have already been no avoiding this. Kobayashi says, the other day, an informant contacted me. They said the girl in the photo that went viral online is Sasaki Yui. I was planning to meet with you to confirm that info, but I'm convinced by this time's incident. I never thought it would come to this. Takashi says, shocked, who was it? Who was the person who told you that? Kobayashi says, I'm sorry. I can't give out the names of my sources. The name of the victim, Sasaki Yui, is already being broadcasted on TV. Soon the culprit will also be identified. This case will inevitably be linked to the incident 3 years ago by reporters. Takashi-kun. As Takashi sees his getting a call from Ken, Kobayashi says, Takashi-kun. Takashi takes the call as Ken says, the news is saying that Sasaki-kun was hurt. Is that news really true? Takashi says, yeah. As Ken says, I don't get it. She was just the victim of rape, right? Takashi gets shocked as he says in his mind, why does Ken-chan know? It couldn't be. The informant is Ken-chan. Ken says, can we meet up right now? I need to talk to you too. Takashi tells Kobayashi, sorry, something just came up. As Kobayashi says, is that so? If there's anything you want to say, just contact me. As Ken arrives, he says, my mom would be in the way. sorry for meeting in this kind of place. Takashi says, were you the one that gave information to the reporter Kobayashi-san? Ken says, that's right, as Takashi strikes back saying, how did you know that photo? Ken says, it's all your fault. The reason I'm like this. It's all your fault. I was targeted for protecting you. I lost people's trust and my life became a mess. Why do you think I knew it was Sasaki-san? Or why I leaked things? Don't you think I got my hands on that info to ruin that girl's life? Don't you think I was just trying to hurt those close to you? Takashi says, I don't think that. Even now, you are my one and only true friend. The last time we met, I did an incredible, awful thing to that friend. I hurt you, even though you were always on my side. I could never apologize enough for that. When I selfishly decided to protect Sasaki-san, I let those important to me get hurt. My family, and you, Ken-chan. And I kept on lying. But in the end, not even her. I couldn't even protect her. Ken says, that day, after you left, for a while I hated you. All I thought about was how you messed up my life, but the reason I became like this is because of my own weakness. I understood that all along, without putting in any effort in getting back on my feet. I used you as an excuse to stay holed up in my room. As Takashi says, Ken-chan. Ken says, it was that dolphin keychain. Seeing Takashi confused, Ken says, the girl's face was censored, but on the bag that was beside her, there was a dolphin keychain, wasn't there? Weren't you given a similar keychain before the incident? I still remember you being foolishly happy about sharing something with her. After seeing that, I figured that in order to protect Sasaki-san, who was being raped, you ended up killing that teacher. You were trying to keep that all a secret, right? Takashi says, why did you go to that reporter? Ken says, after that incident 3 years ago, I was approached by reporters countless times. That guy didn't write you off as just a boy who had a screw loose. He seemed like he could be trusted, so I contacted him. I was going to leave it to Kobayashi-san. But after seeing the news this morning, I called you. When you came to meet me that day, you wanted to tell me what really happened 3 years ago, right? But I was too busy taking care of myself, so I didn't realize you definitely were suffering more than me at the time. But I was supposed to be my best friend's only ally, and yet, Takashi, everyone is still living 3 years in the past. Me, you, and your family are, and Sasaki-san. Unless you reveal the truth about that incident, nobody will be able to truly move on. That's what I believe. Takashi recalls when he said to Sasaki, I will protect you. Just say that I was the one that killed the teacher. Don't worry, we'll be able to meet again soon. Takashi says, after I was released from that facility, I thought I shouldn't meet with Sasaki-san again. I thought she would be happier that way, but then she appeared in front of me. I couldn't help but wanted to stay connected to her. As long as we shared this secret, we could be together. If I told the truth, turning myself in would have been for nothing, and I would be separated from her, Ken says. Just for a reason like that, Takashi says, the one who stabbed Sasaki-san is Yamashita-sensei's son. He learned the truth of that incident, that it wasn't me, but Sasaki-san that killed that teacher. Ken says, shocked, you're lying. It can't be. Then you, in place of Sasaki-san, you turned yourself in? For Sasaki-san, you'd go that far. Takashi gets up and says, thank you, Ken-chan, for saying someone like me is your best friend. Ken says, what are you planning on doing now? Takashi says, I'm going to go do what I'm supposed to. Later on in the day, Takashi called his mother and left her a voice message on her phone saying, Mom, I'll just leave a message. I understand that you don't want to see me, but could you return home for a while? I'll bring everything to light. Then Takashi says in his mind, everything that happened 3 years ago. As Kobayashi arrives at Takashi's home and sets up his recording camera, he says, we can go public with the video as soon as tomorrow on Weekly Attack's website. We're not censoring your face, as per your request. Are you really fine with that? As Takashi says, yes. Kobayashi says in his mind, an uncensored confession from Boy A. Thinking of the repercussions, a part of me doesn't want to air this, but then Kobayashi says to Takashi, you can talk now. Takashi begins by saying, 3 years ago, I was a first-year middle school student, and in the same class, there was the victim of this time's incident, Sasaki Yui. I was in love with her. She was cute and always smiling. But one day, that smile was taken away by her homeroom teacher Yamashita-sensei, who deflowered her. That day, 3 years ago, I witnessed that scene, and, in order to save her, I bashed in the teacher's head with the bat I had on me, with the intent to murder him. Kobayashi says, the intent? You hadn't murdered him yet? As Takashi says, no, I did not murder him. Mrs. Ogura gets shocked as she says, what? And Kobayashi says, didn't murder him? There was nobody else there apart from you and the girl, right? Then you're saying she was the one who murdered him? Mrs. Ogura says, wait, Takashi, you didn't kill him? What are you saying? Then why did you turn yourself in? Answer me, Takashi. Takashi says, I'm sorry, Mum. Please just listen to what I have to say. Kobayashi says, Sasaki Yui is currently unconscious. What you're saying would make her the culprit of that incident. Do you have proof of the sexual assault that caused her, the victim, to murder someone? Takashi recalls when Takayuki handed him a USB stick saying, "I'll leave this with you. It's the USB with the data you've wanted so badly. It's not just photos. It's even got videos of the crimes my dad confessed." But Takashi says, "There is no proof. All I have is my words." Kobayashi says, "You lied and confessed to the crime to protect Sasaki-san. If what you're saying is true, then you made your family go through hell for that lie? At the time, were you thinking about your family at all?" Takashi says, "I avoided thinking about them. But the reality is my mother lost her store, and my sister dropped out of university. It's all because of the lies that I've told. My identity was leaked and my family started to get harassed and persecuted, and I continued to lie to my family. I used protecting Sasaki-san as an excuse to keep lying. Even though the lawsuit was withdrawn, my mother continued saving money for the deceased's family. She collapsed from being overworked. My sister suffered and paid for crimes she didn't even do. I ruined both of their lives. I don't think I'll ever be able to regain their trust, but I am truly sorry." Kobayashi says, "I'll ask this. If you could go back to that day 3 years ago, would you choose to do the same thing?" Takashi says, "If I could go back and relive that incident, it isn't clear to me what actions would create the best outcome. But if I could go back, I wish I could somehow save her by some other means." Kobayashi says, "One last thing. The recent incident where Sasaki-san was severely hurt. The culprit seems to be the son of the teacher who was killed 3 years ago. Do you have anything to say to him who's now a criminal?" Takayuki was watching the live from his cell as Takashi says, "That day 3 years ago, if I hadn't lied and turned myself in, maybe he wouldn't have done what he did now. For 3 years, he resented Boye. To find out the murderer wasn't him, I can't imagine what was going through his mind when he found out. The recent incident was a result of my own selfish lie. To the son of that teacher, from the bottom of my heart, I want to apologize to you." The next day, reporters cornered Sasaki's mother saying, "Please comment on Boy A's video. He has implied that your daughter is the true culprit behind those events 3 years ago. Do you have anything you want to say to him? Yui is a murderer?" Sasaki's mother lashes out saying, "It's a lie told by Boy A. No matter how you look at it, Yui is a victim. Once she wakes up, everything will become clear." Meanwhile, as Takashi goes back to school, Aoi says, "Wait, is he for real?" Nubira says, "Coming back with that kind of timing?" Mukui says, "Boy A came to school." Ohan says, "It's true. I just saw him coming in, even though there's still a bunch of reporters waiting at the gates." Nubira says, "Do you believe he didn't kill him?" "There's no way he didn't. There's no proof or anything." Seeing Takashi, Itakura says, "You finally came to school. You weren't coming to work either. It's been a while since we last saw each other." Takashi says, "My boss told me not to come for now. Sorry for the trouble." Itakura says, "Well, you'd only cause a panic if you came right now. It's been 4 days since that confession, huh? You might be a celebrity right now. For a while, the media won't be able to leave you alone. But it won't last forever. Soon the winds will change. If some other incident happens, the media and the masses will focus on that. So don't resign yourself to this lifestyle. I'm sure you'll be able to get a normal life again." Just then, Yamada arrives, saying, "Oh, you're really here, Boy A." As Itakura says, "This girl again." Yamada says, "What kind of balls do you have to come to school again? No one in all of Japan would believe anything Boy A says. On top of being a murderer, you're also a fool who would sell out a girl who isn't even conscious in the first place." Itakura says, "Ah, you won't shut up. What are you doing always picking on him? In the first place, you still haven't apologized for that time with your wallet. Why don't you do that first?" Yamada says, "I guess like-minded freaks flock together. I heard from someone who went to the same school as you. You know you were being mistreated, right? And by your real father?" Ohan says, "Are you serious?" Yamada says, "Well, I guess in a certain way, you two suit each other. But I wonder, how did he mistreat you? Was he violent or was it deflowering?" "Deflowered by your real father?" Just then, Takashi lashes out, saying, "Hey, stop screwing around." Yamada yells, saying, "What the hell? Why are you acting high and mighty, you murderer? Don't you remember what you did last time you were here? You forced a girl into taking a photo and uploaded it online. Do you know what kind of trauma she went through? That photo will stay on the internet for the rest of her life. That was a pretty horrible thing to do. A normal person wouldn't be able to do something like that." "That's right, everyone. This guy's not normal. I was almost killed by him too, you know." Mukui says, "That's true. As I always said, it's really scary to be around him." As Yamada says, "Murderer. Come on, everybody. Don't worry." Takashi says, "I'm going to drop out of school," shocking everyone. "Today I just was going to get the paperwork for withdrawing. I was planning to stop right away, but the processing is taking a while. I'm sorry for making you uncomfortable." As Takashi comes home and sees Kanako, he says, "Oni-chan." Kanako says, "Every day it's always you on the news. How does it feel? Are you happy? You just got everything off your chest. After all this time, what do you mean you didn't murder him? That guy really used me like a tool. What the hell is my life supposed to be?" Kanako removes a phone saying, "Hey, Takashi, in the bag that guy left in my room, I found this. Do you know what it is? That guy had another phone. There's a lot of interesting stuff on it, like threads aimed at at you. Uncensored photos of Sasaki-san being deflowered. As Takashi says, Oni-chan. Kanako says, do you know how much I despise you? It's enough to even hurt that girl you've been trying so hard to protect. Takashi says, please Oni-chan, give that to me. As Kanako gives the phone to Takashi, she says, I know I was just being used, but that phone's passcode. It's the day we started dating. I can't help but think that maybe he really did love me. I know it's silly, but it's the truth that he supported me. Takashi says, I'm so sorry. Meanwhile, over with Sasaki, Itakura was visiting her. As Itakura sat beside her, she says, you really have nice hair, Yui-chan, but I really can't forgive that guy. He's trying to bring you down with him. I'll make sure to protect you, even if that means having to murder him. Just as Sasaki's mother enters, saying, Itakura-san, thank you for always coming to visit. Itakura says, no, it's nothing. Then I'll be on my way. After a few days, Kobayashi calls Takashi and says, Takashi-kin, can I have a word? I got a call from a reporter that's been waiting at the hospital. As Takashi says, a call? Kobayashi says, yeah. Apparently, Sasaki-san has regained consciousness. Meanwhile, on the news, the host says it's been 5 days since she lost her consciousness, and now she's finally awake. Over at the hospital, Sasaki's mother says, don't worry, Yui. I'll make sure to keep you safe. It's all that guy's fault that it's gotten to this point. Everything he said about that incident 3 years ago is made up. Isn't that right, Yui? I'll take legal action against him. Sasaki says, Mom, what he said is true. Sasaki's mother says, shocked, What? What are you saying, Yui? Wait, Yui, why are you telling such lies? You were being deflowered before that incident? I'm your mother, you know? There's no way I wouldn't notice something like that was happening to my own daughter. Maybe you're being threatened by Boy A too. Sasaki says, before that incident, do you remember when my homeroom teacher came to our house? I was being deflowered even before that day. That teacher came that day to warn me that suddenly not coming to school would be suspicious. Sasaki's mother says, crying, that's something like that. Just then an officer comes, saying, excuse me, this is the police. We'd like to talk to your daughter about the incident a few days ago. Is now a good time? Sasaki's mother says, I'm sorry. It seems like she's still not in a condition to talk. The police officer says, but we've heard that she's recovered a bit. Sasaki's mother says anxiously, just leave for today, please. Meanwhile, as Takashi was walking on the street, he says in his mind, apparently, Sasaki-san's regained consciousness. Itakura comes over saying, the media are all over your house. As Takashi looks confused, saying, who? In his mind, Itakura says, we've talked once before, through Yui-chan's phone. Recalling the time, Takashi says, from that time, when the voice said, Yui-chan doesn't want to talk to you, Takashi says, do you need something from me? Itakura says, Yui-chan texted me and asked me to take you to the hospital. As Takashi says, shocked. What? Itakura says, she said, my mother deleted it. Your phone number. Well, of course she would. There's no way she'd want her daughter talking with a murderer. As Takashi looks down, Itakura says, it's a lie, right? Your confession. To put your crimes on someone else? Isn't it obvious that you're the murderer? Do you understand how much Yui-chan is suffering right now? Takashi says, I have something I want to talk to her about too. Thank you for telling me. Itakura says, wait, with all the media around the hospital, how do you plan on getting in? I'm coming with you. Meanwhile, a police chief says at a press conference, concerning the incident from 3 years ago that everybody's in an uproar about, there is absolutely no proof behind Boy A's statements. It's all nonsense. We are investigating to verify his. A female reporter says, is that really true? The police chief says, it's been 4 days since the girl has regained consciousness. In that time, she hasn't done anything to deny his statements. A male reporter says, isn't there a problem with the speed of your investigations? A male reporter says, isn't there a problem with the speed of your investigations? The police chief says, there is none. There is nothing to support the boy's statements. And that incident has already been settled in court. Meanwhile, as Sasaki was watching the press conference, she says, this conference is over. Ah, wait, was there no concealment of the truth of that incident? Just then, Sugata says, Sasaki, can I come in? As Sugata enters, Sasaki says, Senpai? As Sugata says, sorry for barging in. I heard you regained consciousness. Where is your mom? Sasaki says, she's talking with a doctor from the hospital right now. Sugata says, I'm sorry, Sasaki, for suddenly hugging you that day. I never thought you had such a horrible experience with a man in the past. It must have been scary, right? I'm sorry. I just wanted to apologize for that. Sasaki says, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't know anything about it. I'm just glad that I'm able to talk with you again, Senpai. Sugita says, but Itakura told me you don't want to see me anymore. Sasaki says, shocked, what? There's no way. I haven't even implied something like that to her. Sugita says, actually, I came to the hospital yesterday. He has a flashback in which Itakura said, what did you come here for? How many times do I have to tell you? Yui-chan doesn't want to see you anymore. Back to the present, Sasaki says, shocked. Why would she lie about that? Sugita says, I don't know why, but she's very attached to you, enough to scare me. I feel like she would do anything for your sake. Sasaki says, where is she right now? Meanwhile, over with Itakura, as she was with Takashi, she says in her mind, Takashi-kun, boy, it's all your fault. You're the reason why she fell unconscious, and why she won't turn my way. Someone like you, as she pushes Takashi onto the road, should disappear. Sasaki says, it's no good. I can't reach Itakura-san. As Sugita says, is that so? He says in his mind, there's no way. Even Itakura would add tragedies related to that incident. Sasaki says, when I asked her to bring Takashi-kun here, she happily accepted to do it. She was really pleased. I don't have anybody else I could ask something like that for. On top of that, she's always concerning herself with me. But I don't know anymore. I thought she was my friend, but I don't know what she's thinking. Sugita says, I'll go take a look outside. We might just be thinking about it too much. Maybe there's just so many reporters it's hard for them to get in. I'll return as soon as I find them. As the door opens, Sasaki says, Senpai, but sees it's Itakura, so she says, Itakura-san, did you miss Senpai going out? Itakura says, I saw Senpai leaving. I thought you'd be alone. Let's talk for a bit, just the two of us. Sasaki says, where's Takashi-kun? Did you meet with Takashi-kun? Itakura says, stop it. You're always only talking about him. Why don't you look at me? I love you. I love you so much I don't know what to do with myself. As Sasaki looks confused, Itakura says, if what boy A said is true, then you've been deflowered, right? Then you can't trust men anymore, right? I'll always be by your side, you know? So, Sasaki says, I'm sorry. I can't answer your feelings. I'm really sorry. Itakura says, what? Don't mess with me. Why don't you accept me? Do you have any idea how much I've sacrificed for you? As Itakura becomes anxious, Sasaki says, what did you do? Itakura freaks out, saying, what did I do? Did someone see me? What's going to happen to me? Sasaki calls out, Itakura-san. Just then, Sasaki gets a call from Sugita and receives the call saying, hello, senpai? Takashi says on the line, it's me, it's Takashi. Sasaki says frantically, Takashi-kun, where are you? Why do you have senpai's phone? Takashi says, I met him close to the hospital and borrowed it. More importantly, if Itakura-san is there, could I talk with her a bit? In a flashback, as Itakura pushed Takashi on the road, he barely managed to not get hit by a car. Seeing him being almost hit by a car, Itakura says, freaking out, I was about to kill him, attempted murder. Back to the present as Itakura takes the phone and says, Takashi says, it's okay, I won't tell anybody what you did. As Itakura says, shocked, what? Takashi says, in your own way you were trying to protect her, right? Then I'll accept it. I know that not everyone would believe what I said in my confession. I'll carry this burden of the things I did that day for the rest of my life, no matter what happens to me. Sasaki says, Itakura-san, where's Takashi-kun? Itakura says, he's coming here. I'll keep your mom busy so she doesn't come in while you're talking to him. As Sasaki calls out, wait, Itakura says in her mind, to be responsible for your actions, even if it means you can't be with the ones you love. I'm not capable of that. As Takashi enters, Sasaki says, Takashi-kun. Takashi says, thanks to your senpai's help, I was able to get here. Sasaki says, did Itakura-san do something to you? Takashi says, no, she didn't do anything. Sasaki says, okay. After I regained consciousness, I was always thinking, I wanted to see you. Can I ask you one thing? Why didn't you show anybody the USB with the photos on it? Sasaki says, it's undeniable proof of the truth of the incident 3 years ago. So why don't you use it? If the world learns about what's in there, your standing in society should become much better than it is now. The police might even conduct a secondary investigation. Takashi says, that's not what I want. I didn't make those statements because I wanted the court to reconsider their judgments. More than anything, I didn't want to release photos of you in that horrible state, even if it's just to the police. Sasaki says, Takashi-kun. Takashi says, I've already gotten rid of the USB. Nobody will ever set their eyes on those photos again, so don't ever worry about it again. As Sasaki says, why? She says in her mind, you've always been protecting me, even if it means sacrificing yourself, because you weren't scared. Even after what I did that day and stayed by my side, I was able to make it this far. As Sasaki says, Takashi-kun. She says in her mind, will I be able to move on? From now on, will I be able to move forward without his support? There's no way. But if we could both support each other? As Sasaki was about to say something, Takashi says, Ken-chan told me, nobody will be able to move on until the truth of that day is out. I think he was right. But for the two of us, I think just that isn't enough. Let's have today be our last day. After today, let's never contact each other again, so that both you and I can move forward. I think that's the right thing to do. As Sasaki says, Takashi-kun, with tears rolling down her cheeks. I was about to say the same thing. Takashi gets up, and as he leaves, he says, goodbye. He he says in his mind, Sasaki, I've always loved you. As Takashi comes out, he says to Sugata, I won't meet with her again. From now on, please support her for me. As Takashi bows much to Sugata's surprise, Takashi says, I leave her in your hands. As Takashi leaves, Sugata says, you're amazing. I couldn't live my life the way that you live yours, but I'm sure I can become that girl's strength. As Sugata takes Takashi back home, he says to Takashi, let's go. The next day, at the school, the principal says to Mrs. Ogura, the other day your son handed in a withdrawal form. The decision to stop attending school requires not only the student's consent, but also that their guardian is also in agreement. Can you confirm that we can proceed with the withdrawal process? As Takashi says, Mom, Mrs. Ogura says, I want my son to continue attending high school until he graduates. As the principal says, but Mrs. Ogura says, I understand. Even just knowing that my son will still be enrolled will cause a lot of disorder at school. But with my son's confession, the situation should slowly improve. If the situation doesn't improve and he continues causing trouble for the other students, then at that time, we will properly have him withdraw. Mrs. Ogura bows, saying, please, just one more. Give my child one more chance. Over with Sasaki. As she was having her rehabilitation, she falls as the nurse says frantically, Sasaki-san, are you all right? As Sasaki says, yes. The nurse says, why don't we rest for a bit? Sasaki says, what? I'm still… The nurse says, it's not good to push yourself too hard. Sugata says, I guess rehabilitation is going to be difficult. As Sasaki says, yeah. Sugata says, if there's anything I can help? Just then the nurses talking could be heard as one says, the press is still out there. They're a nuisance, to be honest. The other one says, some of the other patients are also scared of them. Do you think it was that girl that finished him after all? Hearing them, Sugata says, are you okay? Sasaki says, I'll go back to the rehabilitation room. And Senpai, you are helping me. It's reassuring to have you here. But for now, I want to get stronger myself. Over at the school, as Takashi entered the grounds, Ohan says, wasn't he supposed to have dropped out? Aoi says, why is he at school? Sama says, look who showed up. What are you thinking coming here? Just then, Himi calls out, Yamazaki, good morning. As Sama looks shocked, saying, what? Takashi replies with a smile. Good morning. Just then, Kahelai calls out, morning. Takashi says, Kahelai-san, good morning. Are you crying? Kahelai says, no, I'm not. After a few years, over at a restaurant, a waiter calls out, table 3 just ordered a sashimi platter. The head chef says, understood. Yamazaki, can I leave that order up to you? Takashi looks over, saying, yes, chef. The head chef says, we're so packed today. Figures that the main store would have the most traffic, huh? Takashi says, you said it. As Takashi gets back to work, he says in his mind, it's been 5 years since I gave that confession. As the head chef says, good work today. Takashi also says, you too. Takashi says in his mind, even though my confession was covered extensively by the news media, the police still never fully admitted the truth. As Ken comes over saying, good morning, Yamazaki, Takashi says in his mind, but despite that, I was able to continue attending high school up until graduation, supported by my friends and my mother. As Takashi enters home, he says in his mind, but above all, as he enters, he says, yup, I'm almost home. Kahelai says, smiling, welcome home. Was today busy as well? Takashi says, yeah, but nothing too out of hand. Takashi says in his mind, but above all, I'm most grateful for having Kahelai-san with me every step of the way. Takashi says, did Ken-chan already come by? Kahelai says, yeah, he did. He already got super drunk. It was a huge pain in the ass, so I left him. Takashi says, is that so? About what we talked about this morning, since it's been pushed to next Monday. Kahelai says, ah, I see. Ken says, damn, life's been really ramming me up the face lately. Kahelai says, the damn you mean? Don't you have it made as a student? Ken says, no, being a student has its own problems too, you know. Takashi says, looks like you've got to start job hunting next year. Have anything you think you want to do? Ken says, no, really. But speaking of work, I'm surprised you're the one bringing it up, Kahelai-san. You're a freaking nursery school teacher. When Takashi first introduced us, I thought you were an ex-delinquent. Kahelai says, you want to throw hands? Maybe Takashi-kun ought to think about making new friends. Ken says, huh? Takashi and I are tight as damn. Just then Ken says, that's right. Takashi, has Sasaki-san contacted you at all? As Kahelai gets angry, saying, hey now. Ken says, ah, sorry. Takashi says, she hasn't contacted me. Ken says, I just saw her active on social again, so… Takashi says, I just wanted her to find happiness, but it's already been 5 years. We've already gone our separate ways in that time. And besides that, as he takes hold of Kahalai's hand, I've already got someone who's more important than anybody else to me. Kahalai blushes, saying, how can you say something so embarrassing with such a straight face? Ken says, all right then. Must be nice to have a girlfriend. I ought to get one soon. Takashi says, you should be going home soon. Meanwhile, Sasaki was attending a meeting where she says, I was assaulted a few years ago. I'm sure there are some among you who must have heard my story on the news at some point, and about the grave sin I committed as well. I saw my story spread on the internet and TV and thought to myself many times, I want to finish. But I have chosen to live. To be honest, I'm still not sure if speaking out here will be helpful. I'm certain there will be many unpleasant feelings that incident left over. But as long as there are people willing to listen, I would like to continue telling my story. As Sasaki took her leave, Sugita calls out, Sasaki. Seeing Sugita, Sasaki says, Senpai. Sugita says, work ended early, so I thought I'd pop by. Sasaki says, did you hear me talking in there? Sugita says, a little bit, in the hallway. Felt like bad form to come in the middle. Say, if you've got some time, want to grab a bite together? Sasaki says, I'd be up for that. I spoke with some women after today's lecture as well. Sasaki recalls as one said, I was deflowered when I was in high school by two guys I didn't know. They're still out there somewhere to this day. To be honest, I wish they could be brought to justice for what they did. That's why your story gives me strength. It makes me feel like I'm not alone in my struggle. Sasaki says, she said that she hoped she could accept her past self and move forward, to accept who she was and the deep impression it left in her. She said she wanted to become a stronger person, just like me. As Sugita says, I see. Sasaki says, but I'm not strong at all. I haven't accepted myself at all, not then and not now. Even when I'm alone, I think back to that day. I can't help but burst into tears. I'm glad my story can be of use to people, but to be honest, I think I was saved because somebody out there was willing to listen to me. As Sugita walks along, he says in his mind, it seems that even at the end, I was still unable to help her at all, even though it's been 5 years. But even still, Sugita says to Sasaki, Sasaki, I'll always be there for you, is what I should say, but I'm not your boyfriend. Sorry. Sasaki says, you don't have to apologize. Over at a hospital, Yamashita Takayuki was with his mother as a nurse says, was that her son just now? A head nurse says, yes. The nurse says, I wonder how she feels. For her son to be caught up in such a big incident and then arrested. The head nurse says, one can only guess, but eventually he was able to come visit again. And I'm sure that's what's helped her recover slowly the most. In any case, it's not something we nurses should be prying into. The nurse says, yes, ma'am. Takayuki says, it's gotten cooler outside, hasn't it? Are you cold, Mom? We should go inside soon. Meanwhile, over with Mrs. Ogura, Kanako says, thanks so much, Mom. As Kanako was holding her baby, she says, this kid really seems to like her clothes. Mrs. Ogura says, I see. Kanako says, it seems like Aoi really loves her grandma. Mrs. Ogura says, well, that makes me super happy. I can't believe she's already 1 year old. Just then, the doorbell rings as Mrs. Ogura says, it seems like they've arrived. Kanako says, yeah. As Takashi and Kahalai enter, Kahalai says, we got you this. Mrs. Ogura says, thank you so much. As Mrs. Ogura goes to the kitchen, she calls out, that's right, Kahalai-san. Would you mind giving me a hand? Kahalai says, yes, of course. As Kahalai leaves, Takashi says, is this? Kanako says, yup, this is Aoi. This is your first time meeting her, huh? As Takashi says, yeah. As he bends to look at her, he says, I'm really happy that I finally get to see her. Kanako says, I'm sorry for not calling you when she was born. Takashi says, smiling, that's not something you have to apologize for. Kanako says, I've hated you for 8 years, for ruining my life and completely derailing what I planned for myself and my future. But then, this child was born, and I tried so hard to raise her that I began to think that if that incident had never happened, then I would have never met her and seen her smile. I begin to think like that. There might not come a day where I completely forgive you, but I think I can slowly, bit by bit, meet you halfway. And it's already too much for me to continue hating you after 8 years. As Aoi reaches for Takashi, he cries, saying, thank you so much. Takashi says in his mind, 8 years ago, I was 13 years old. I became Boy A. 8 years have passed since then. And now, peaceful days have come back once again. Just as Takashi was getting ready for work, the host on the news says, here's today's news. A second-year middle schooler hurt his friend, finishing him in his own home. According to the school, they were good friends. The motive remains unknown. Recalling the day, Takashi says in his mind, however, I still haven't forgotten that day. Society won't let me forget, and I'm sure I'll carry what happened in my heart for the rest of my life. Life goes on. As Takashi leaves for work, Kahelai says, good luck at work. Takashi smiles, saying, well, I'm off. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe.